Welcome back, romance lovers. This is part 2 of our captivating romance audiobook series. If you missed the drama, passion, and heart-stopping moments of part 1, don't worry, I've got you covered. Just click the link in the description or comments to catch up before diving into this next chapter. Trust me, you don't want to miss a single moment of this epic love story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know your thoughts below. Chapter 4, Dangerous Truths. Clifford's trip to Austin stretched to 3 days, leaving Chelsea with unexpected freedom to further her investigations. Each evening, she watched from her bedroom window as Graham left the stables after completing his work, following a path that led toward the eastern boundary of the property, toward what had once been Leland. On the third evening, with Clifford's return expected the following day, Chelsea made her decision. As twilight settled over the ranch, she donned a dark blue riding skirt and jacket, plaiting her hair into a simple braid that would not catch on branches or betray her position with glints of light. She slipped from the house unnoticed, the staff occupied with dinner preparations, and followed the path she had seen Graham take. The summer evening was still bright enough to navigate safely, though shadows lengthened beneath the mesquite and oak trees that dotted the landscape. For 20 minutes, Chelsea tracked Graham's route, keeping a cautious distance. He moved with purpose, occasionally glancing behind him, though never quite in her direction. His path took him to the very edge of Wyoming property, where a line of ancient oak trees marked the boundary with what had once been Leland. Graham stopped beneath the largest of these trees, a massive oak whose trunk was wide enough that 3 men could not join hands around it. Chelsea crouched behind a stand of mesquite, watching as he glanced in all directions before reaching into a hollow in the tree's trunk. He withdrew what appeared to be a small leather pouch, opened it, and added papers from inside his vest. Chelsea strained to see better, inadvertently snapping a dry twig beneath her boot. Graham's head jerked up, his body tensing like a hunted animal. "Who's there?" he called, his hand moving to his waist where Chelsea glimpsed the handle of a knife. She considered fleeing, but knew she'd never outrun him. Decision made, she stepped from her hiding place into the fading light. "It's only me." Graham's expression shifted from alarm to disbelief to anger in the space of a heartbeat. "Mrs. Wyoming," he said formally, quickly returning the pouch to the hollow and positioning his body to block her view. "This is far from the house for an evening stroll." "I followed you," Chelsea admitted, seeing no point in prevarication. "That much is obvious," he replied, his voice cooler than she had ever heard it. "The question is why?" Chelsea moved closer, stopping several paces from him. "I believe you know why, Mr. Lee, or should I say, Graham Lee, son of James Lee, former owner of the adjacent property." His face revealed nothing, though she noted how his shoulders stiffened at her words. "You've been making inquiries." "I've been seeking the truth," she corrected. "Something in short supply at Wyoming Ranch?" "The truth can be dangerous, especially for a woman in your position." His eyes searched her face. "Why risk your comfortable situation asking questions about me?" "Because nothing about my situation feels comfortable anymore," Chelsea replied with quiet intensity. "My husband holds secret meetings with men who still speak of the cause years after the war. He marks maps with railway targets and supply routes, and he reacts with barely controlled rage at the mere mention of your family name." She took another step closer. "Whatever game you're playing by working in his stables, I deserve to know what it is." Graham remained silent, studying her with an unreadable expression. The fading light emphasized the sharp planes of his face, the wariness in his dark eyes. "You're collecting evidence against my husband," Chelsea pressed on. "That's what you keep in the hollow tree, isn't it? But evidence of what? What is Clifford involved in that would bring you back to work for the man who took your family's land?" "You should return to the house," Graham said finally. "It's not safe for you to be seen with me, especially asking such questions." "I'm not leaving until I have answers," Chelsea insisted, her chin lifting in defiance. "Clifford returns tomorrow. This may be my only chance to understand what's happening." The standoff stretched between them, taut with unspoken tensions. Then, surprisingly, Graham's expression softened. "You truly don't know what kind of man you married, do you?" he asked, his voice gentler now. "I'm beginning to suspect," Chelsea admitted. But I need to hear it from someone I trust. The word trust seemed to strike Graham like a physical blow. He ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture of uncharacteristic uncertainty. If Wymain discovers you've spoken with me this way, won't, Chelsea promised. Not unless you tell him. Graham gave a mirthless laugh. I'm the last person who would inform Clifford Wymain of anything. He glanced at the darkening sky, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he gestured toward a fallen log a few yards away. Sit. This isn't a story that can be told quickly. Chelsea settled on the log, her heart pounding with anticipation and trepidation. Graham remained standing, positioning himself where he could watch the path back to the ranch. You're right about who I am, he began. James Lee was my father. This land, he gestured to the east, was our family ranch for 20 years. My father built it from nothing after coming to Texas from Tennessee. Ida May told me your father was accused of murdering a business associate, Chelsea said. Graham's jaw tightened. Augustus Fordham, a railroad investor from Austin and close friend of your husband. He was found dead near our property line one morning in the spring of '68, shot in the back. His voice hardened. My father was charged, tried, and convicted within 2 weeks. The evidence was overwhelming and entirely fabricated. Fabricated by whom? By your husband and his Confederates, Graham stated flatly. My father refused to sell our land to the railroad interests Clifford represented. Our property contained a natural pass through the hills, the most direct route for the planned railway from Austin to the Northern Territories. When my father rejected their final offer, Fordham was conveniently murdered in a way that implicated him. Chelsea felt sick at the casual way Graham described such calculated evil, but surely there was a proper investigation. The investigation was conducted by Sheriff Taylor, whose campaign for office had been generously funded by Wymain and his associates. The judge who presided over the trial owed Wymain for settling his gambling debts. Graham's bitter smile held no humor. Justice in Texas can be remarkably accommodating when the right influence is applied. What happened to your father? Chelsea asked softly, though she feared she already knew the answer. Wyman died in prison 8 months later, official report said typhoid. 3 other prisoners died that same week. Graham's voice was flat, but Chelsea could sense the pain beneath his controlled exterior. I was studying engineering in St. Louis when it happened. By the time I returned, Wymini had acquired our property through foreclosure, and anyone who might have spoken in my father's defense had either left the area or suddenly lost their memories. And you? Chelsea prompted when he fell silent. Where did you go? Graham's eyes met hers directly. I spent 2 years gathering evidence, trying to prove my father's innocence and Wymain's guilt, but doors closed in my face everywhere I turned. Then a man approached me in a San Antonio hotel, Alan Pinkerton himself. The detective agency? Chelsea had read about the famous Pinkerton National Detective Agency in newspaper accounts. Graham nodded. Pinkerton had been investigating a series of railway disruptions across the South, targeted attacks that didn't appear random. His agents had traced connections back to Texas, specifically to certain prominent ranchers and former Confederate officers. His gaze was steady, including your husband. A chill ran through Chelsea despite the warm evening. What did Pinkerton want from you? An operative inside Wymain Ranch. Someone who could document the conspiracy from within. Graham gestured toward the hollow tree. I've been collecting evidence for 7 months now. Meeting records, supply manifests, correspondence between Wymain and other conspirators. That's why you took a position as a stable hand, Chelsea realized. No one pays attention to servants, especially not one who keeps his head down and appears barely literate, Graham agreed. Though I hadn't counted on the master's new wife taking an interest in poetry and horses. The hint of warmth in his voice made Chelsea flush. I still don't understand what Clifford is planning that would interest the Pinkerton agency. What conspiracy? Graham's expression sobered. Something far more dangerous than simple land theft or murder, I'm afraid. He glanced around once more, ensuring they remained alone, then lowered his voice. Your husband is part of a network of former Confederate officers and sympathizers, planning a coordinated campaign to destabilize Reconstruction and reclaim control of the South. But the war ended 8 years ago, Chelsea protested. For some men, it never ended. Graham replied grimly. They merely retreated to plan a different kind of battle. The men who visit Wymain Ranch, Colonel Barnett, Judge Hamilton, Senator Davis, they're all part of what they call the Redemption League. Redemption? Chelsea echoed, the word taking on sinister overtones. They believe the South was betrayed, that the outcome at Appomattox was a temporary setback rather than a final defeat. Graham's voice hardened. The plan involves simultaneous attacks on federal installations, railway sabotage at key junctions, and targeted assassinations of Reconstruction officials and Republican appointees. Their goal is to create enough chaos to justify martial law, which they believe will allow them to regain political control and effectively nullify emancipation. Chelsea felt the blood drain from her face as the pieces fell into place. The maps in Clifford's study marking railway junctions and federal outposts, the cryptic references to phases and targets, the midnight meetings with men in Confederate gray. The shipments I overheard them discussing, she whispered. Weapons? Graham nodded. Ammunitions and explosives primarily, smuggled across the Mexican border and distributed through a network of properties owned by League members. Your husband's acquisition of my family's land was strategic. Our property provides the ideal distribution point for the northern branch of their operation. How far along are their plans? Chelsea asked, her mind racing with the implications. Too far, Graham answered grimly. The first coordinated actions are scheduled for mid-July, less than 3 weeks from now. Railway bridges in 4 locations, telegraph offices in 6 cities, and the offices of 3 federal marshals will be attacked simultaneously. Dear God, Chelsea breathed. The scale of it is precisely why the Pinkertons have been unable to convince federal authorities to act without conclusive evidence. The accusations sound too fantastical, especially against men of Wymain's standing. Graham gestured toward the hollow tree. I've gathered substantial documentation, but I still lack the definitive proof connecting Wymain directly to the planned violence. Without that, the authorities will hesitate to move against such prominent citizens. And meanwhile, innocent people will die, Chelsea concluded. Many innocent people, Graham confirmed. Including, I fear, anyone who threatens to expose their plans. The implication hung heavily in the twilight air between them. Chelsea rose from the log, needing to move as her thoughts tumbled over one another. Why are you telling me all this? She asked finally. Aren't you afraid I'll warn Clifford? Graham studied her face in the fading light. I've watched you for months, Chelsea, first from a distance, then in our conversations. You value truth and justice. You recognize the difference between right and wrong. His voice softened. And I don't believe you could stand by and allow innocent blood to be shed, no matter what vows you've made. The confidence in his assessment touched her deeply. You've risked everything telling me this, she said quietly. Yes, he acknowledged simply. The unspoken question hung between them. What would she do with this dangerous knowledge? Chelsea turned away, gazing toward the grand house in the distance, its windows now glowing with lamplight against the darkening sky. In that house, she had a position, security, a future as Mrs. Clifford Wymain. To turn against her husband would mean sacrificing everything she had married him to gain. Yet how could she return to that house, share meals with Clifford, and play the dutiful wife, knowing what he planned? How could she face herself if her silence enabled violence and death? Tell me what you need, she said at last, turning back to Graham. What evidence would connect Clifford directly to the planned attacks? Relief flickered across Graham's face, quickly replaced by gravity. Wymain keeps a red leather logbook in his safe. Records of all weapons shipments, payment distributions to operatives, and the final attack plans with his signature authorizing each action. It's the one document that would be impossible to explain away as simple business dealings. And you haven't been able to access this safe? Graham shook his head. It's in his private study. The only key remains on his person at all times. Chelsea thought of Clifford's study, the room she had been explicitly forbidden to enter without his presence. I might be able to gain access, she said slowly. As his wife, I can move through the house without suspicion, especially when he's preoccupied with his business meetings. It would be enormously dangerous, Graham warned. If he caught you, he won't, Chelsea said with more confidence than she felt. When is your next contact with the Pinkertons? An agent meets me weekly at the Hollow Oak to collect my reports. The next meeting is Sunday night. Chelsea nodded, her mind already forming a plan. Clifford hosts the Regional Cattlemen's Association each Sunday evening. It would be the perfect opportunity to search his study while he's occupied with his guests. Chelsea, Graham said, her given name uncommonly intimate in the gathering darkness. You don't have to do this. I could find another way. There isn't time, she interrupted. You said yourself the attacks begin in less than 3 weeks, and She faltered, then continued more firmly. I cannot be complicit through inaction in what he plans to do. Graham moved closer, close enough that she could see the conflict in his eyes. I never intended to involve you in this danger. You didn't involve me, Chelsea corrected quietly. Clifford did that when he made me his wife under false pretenses, when he used my family's financial difficulties to gain a respectable hostess for his conspiracy meetings. She met Graham's gaze steadily. I make this choice myself, with open eyes. For a moment they stood in silence, the weight of their shared purpose creating a bond more intimate than words or touch. Then Graham stepped back, resuming his cautious demeanor. We should return separately, he said. Take the path to the south garden. It's less visible from the house. Chelsea nodded, understanding the wisdom of his suggestion, yet feeling strangely reluctant to leave. How will I contact you if I find something before? Leave a book on the mounting block in the stable. Whitman if you've found something, Tennyson if you haven't. I'll check each morning. Graham's expression softened momentarily. Be careful, Chelsea. These men don't hesitate to eliminate obstacles. I will, she promised. She turned to go, then hesitated. Graham, thank you for trusting me with the truth. He gave a small nod, his eyes holding hers for a moment longer than necessary. Then Chelsea turned and slipped away into the deepening shadows, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and strange elation. As she made her way back toward the grand house that had never truly been her home, Chelsea felt as though she had crossed some invisible threshold. She had arrived at Wymain Ranch as Clifford's carefully selected wife, a decoration for his ambitions. She would return to it now as something entirely different, a woman with purpose, aligned against her husband in a dangerous game where the stakes included not just her own future, but the lives of countless innocent people. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, it filled her with a clarity she hadn't felt since leaving the telegraph office in Redemption. For the first time since her wedding, Chelsea knew exactly who she was and what she must do, regardless of the cost. Dawn tinged the eastern sky with pale gold as Chelsea and Graham continued their tense conversation at the property boundary. Birds had begun their morning chorus, a jarring counterpoint to the grave matters they discussed. Chelsea paced a small circle in the trampled grass, her mind racing with the enormity of what Graham had revealed. Let me understand this clearly, she said, organizing her thoughts aloud. Clifford and his associates plan to destabilize the federal government's control of Texas through coordinated violence, beginning with attacks on railways and telegraph offices. And federal officials, Graham added grimly. The communications disruptions are merely the opening phase. They intend to assassinate key Reconstruction appointees during the ensuing chaos. Chelsea stopped pacing and faced him directly. And you believe my correspondence with the telegraph offices in Redemption and Austin could identify which offices they plan to target? Wymain sends coded messages through those offices regularly, Graham confirmed. You have the skill to intercept them, perhaps even decode them. She nodded slowly, her years at the telegraph key giving her an advantage few others would possess. I may be able to do more than that, she said, thinking aloud. As Clifford's wife, I'm expected to organize his correspondence and maintain his social calendar. If I could gain access to his private study when he's away, that would be extraordinarily dangerous, Graham warned, his brow furrowing with concern. If he caught you. He won't, Chelsea interrupted with more confidence than she felt. Clifford believes I'm exactly what he wanted, a decorative, obedient wife grateful for the security he provides. That blindness gives me freedom to move through his world unnoticed. Graham studied her face, clearly wrestling with the prospect of placing her in such danger. "Why would you risk this?" he asked finally. "You could simply leave, take a train to your mother's home, distance yourself from whatever happens." The question made Chelsea pause. Why, indeed. Her marriage to Clifford had been a business arrangement from the beginning, entered into for her family's security rather than affection. Learning of his criminal activities would have given most women ample justification to flee. "I could leave," she acknowledged. "But that wouldn't stop what's coming. Innocent people would still die. Telegraph operators, like I once was, railway workers, federal marshals doing their duty." She shook her head firmly. "I cannot stand aside knowing I might have prevented such violence." Something shifted in Graham's expression. Respect mingled with a deeper emotion he couldn't quite conceal. "You're a remarkable woman, Chelsea Wymain." "Not remarkable," she corrected. "Simply unable to live with the alternative." She drew a steadying breath. "So we are agreed? I will gather what evidence I can from within the house while maintaining the appearance of the dutiful wife." "And I'll continue documenting the operations from my position in the stables," Graham added. "Between us, we should be able to assemble enough evidence for the Pinkertons to act before the attacks begin." They stood facing each other in the strengthening dawn light, their dangerous partnership newly formed. Chelsea felt an unexpected sense of purpose flood through her, a clarity she hadn't experienced since her days at the telegraph office. "We should establish regular communication," she said practically. "Meetings like this are too risky to repeat often." Graham nodded. "The book signal you suggested is good. Whitman for success, Tennyson for caution." He hesitated, then added, "If you need to see me urgently, request a riding lesson. No one would question the mistress of the house wishing to improve her horsemanship. And if you need to reach me..." Chelsea considered the problem. "The blue shawl. If you see it hanging from my bedroom window, I'll meet you here that night." The practicality of their planning belied the danger they faced. If discovered, Graham would certainly hang as a spy, while Chelsea's fate as a trader's wife would scarcely be better. As if reading her thoughts, Graham's expression sobered. "You can still change your mind," he said quietly. "No one would blame you for protecting yourself. I would blame me," Chelsea replied simply. The intensity between them shifted, the air suddenly charged with awareness that went beyond their conspiracy. For weeks, they had maintained careful distance, despite their growing connection. He, the humble stable hand, she, the master's wife. Their conversations ostensibly about literature and horses. Now, with truth exposed between them, that careful artifice crumbled. Chelsea became acutely conscious of Graham's presence. The strength evident in his stance, the intelligence in his dark eyes, the quiet dignity that had first drawn her attention. "You should return to the house," Graham said, his voice roughening slightly. "The staff will be waking soon." Chelsea nodded, but made no move to leave. "When did you first suspect I might be sympathetic to your cause?" she asked instead. A hint of a smile touched his lips. "When you defended my reading Whitman as something other than pretension. Most women of your position would have agreed with your husband's assessment." "I've never been most women," Chelsea replied. "No," Graham agreed softly. "You haven't." The moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken feelings. Chelsea knew she should leave, knew the danger increased with every minute they remained together. Yet something held her rooted to the spot, her eyes locked with Graham's. "Chelsea," he said, her name a warning and a caress in his mouth. She stepped closer, drawn by forces stronger than caution or propriety. "We may not survive what's coming," she whispered, "either of us." Graham's breath caught visibly, his hand lifted, hovering near her cheek without quite touching. "All the more reason to be careful," he said, though his eyes told a different story. "Or all the more reason to be honest," Chelsea countered. "At least once before we play these roles we've chosen." The struggle was plain on his face. Duty warring with desire, caution with need. Then, with a sound that was half groan and half surrender, Graham closed the distance between them, his hand cupping her cheek as his lips found hers. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, a question Chelsea answered by stepping closer, her hands finding his shoulders. The contact ignited something fierce and hungry in both of them. Graham's arms encircled her waist, drawing her against his solid frame as the kiss deepened, became an exploration neither had permitted themselves to imagine. Chelsea felt herself responding with an intensity that shocked her, her body molding to his as if they had been designed as matching halves of a whole. This was nothing like Clifford's perfunctory embraces, offered as a husband's right rather than a lover's passion. This was fire and tenderness combined, awakening sensations she hadn't known existed. Reality intruded with brutal swiftness, the sound of horses in the distance, moving along the property line. Graham broke the kiss, his breathing ragged as he stared down at her with equal parts wonder and alarm. "Someone's coming," he whispered, the spell broken. Chelsea pressed trembling fingers to her lips, stunned by her own actions. What had she done? Regardless of Clifford's crimes, she remained his wife in the eyes of the law and society. This new betrayal added personal infidelity to her conspiracy against her husband. "I shouldn't have," she began. "No," Graham interrupted gently. "The fault is mine." His eyes told her he considered it no fault at all, even as propriety demanded the words. The sound of horses grew louder. With one last lingering look, Chelsea turned and hurried away, taking the path back toward the garden entrance where her presence might be explained by an early morning walk. Her lips still tingled from Graham's kiss, her heart pounding with emotions too complex to untangle. She had committed herself to a dangerous game, not just against Clifford's conspiracy, but against her own growing feelings for a man she could not honorably claim. 2 evenings later, Chelsea found herself once again at the Hollow Oak, this time with a small packet of papers tucked in her sleeve. Notes she had managed to copy from Clifford's correspondence while sorting his mail that morning. Most contain mundane business matters, but 2 letters from Colonel Barnett included veiled references to shipments and distribution points that might prove valuable to Graham's investigation. She arrived before Graham, slipping the papers into the hollow tree rather than waiting to deliver them personally. Better to limit their direct meetings, especially after the dangerous intimacy of their last encounter. Neither had mentioned the kiss during their brief, carefully public interactions in the stables, though awareness of it hummed between them like a plucked string. As Chelsea turned to leave, voices carried to her on the evening breeze. Male voices approaching along the boundary line. With a surge of alarm, she recognized Clifford's distinctive cadence, followed by Colonel Barnett's deeper tones. There was no time to flee without being seen. Chelsea looked frantically around for cover, spotting a small equipment shed a dozen yards away, half hidden in the tall grass. She ran to it, praying the aged door wouldn't betray her with squeaking hinges. The shed's interior was dark and cramped, filled with abandoned tools and tack from earlier days. Dust tickled her nose as she pressed herself against the back wall, listening to the approaching voices. "Need to secure this entire perimeter," Clifford was saying, his tone clipped and businesslike. "The eastern boundary is particularly vulnerable." "My men can supplement your regular patrols," Barnett replied, "especially as we near the activation date." Their voices grew clearer as they stopped near the hollow oak. Chelsea held her breath, terrified they would discover the hidden documents. "The railway junction here provides the perfect distribution point," Clifford continued. "Once we control this line, we can effectively isolate Austin from federal reinforcements." "Assuming the telegraph offices are neutralized simultaneously," Barnett cautioned, "any warning would bring the army from San Antonio within hours." "The telegraph offices are my primary concern," Clifford admitted. "Our operatives in Redemption and Houston are reliable, but the Austin office is more difficult to infiltrate." Chelsea's blood ran cold. Redemption? Her home? Where her mother and sister lived in the cottage Clifford had arranged for them? Would they be in danger when these attacks began? The shed door suddenly opened, flooding the small space with evening light. Chelsea stifled a gasp, pressing deeper into the shadows. But it was Graham who entered, his finger pressed to his lips in warning as he closed the door quietly behind him. "They're checking the boundary markers," he whispered, his body nearly touching hers in the confined space. "I saw them from the ridge and came to warn you." "I heard," Chelsea breathed, acutely aware of his proximity. They mentioned telegraph offices in Redemption and Houston as targets. Graham nodded grimly. They're finalizing the first phase. Did you manage to... Yes, she interrupted. Notes from Barnett's correspondence. I put them in the tree before I heard them coming. Outside, the men's voices continued, moving slowly along the boundary line as they discussed security measures and patrol schedules. Inside the shed, Chelsea and Graham stood frozen in necessary intimacy, her skirts brushing his legs, his breath warm against her hair. They'll be gone soon, Graham whispered, though he made no move to create what little distance the shed might allow. Waimea never lingers on these inspections. Chelsea nodded, not trusting her voice. The danger of discovery should have been her only concern, yet she found herself distracted by Graham's nearness. The clean scent of his skin, the steady rise and fall of his chest, the way his eyes remained fixed on her face even in the dim light. About what happened, she began haltingly. The other morning, when we don't need to speak of it, Graham said, though his tone suggested he thought of little else. Perhaps we should, Chelsea countered softly. Clear understanding between us seems important now. A sad smile touched his lips. What understanding would that be? That I feel things for you I have no right to feel? That circumstances make any honorable resolution impossible? The raw honesty of his words struck Chelsea like a physical blow. I feel those same things, she admitted. And you're right, there can be no resolution while these current dangers persist. Or while you remain Clifford Waimane's wife, Graham added, the painful truth hanging between them. Chelsea's hand found his in the shadows, their fingers intertwining with a will of their own. When this is over, she said quietly, when Clifford's conspiracy is exposed, my marriage will be nullified. No court would uphold a union to a man convicted of treason. Hope flared briefly in Graham's eyes, quickly tempered by realism. First, we must survive to see that day, he reminded her, and our chances diminish if we allow personal feelings to cloud our judgment. You're right, Chelsea agreed, though she made no move to release his hand. The mission must come first. The voices outside had faded, suggesting Clifford and Barnett had moved further along the boundary. Graham released her hand reluctantly and pressed his eye to a crack in the shed's weathered boards. They're heading toward the main house, he reported. You should return soon before your absence is noted. Chelsea nodded, suddenly all too aware of the risks they were taking. Sunday, she said. While Clifford meets with the Cattlemen's Association, I'll search his study for the Red Ledger. Graham turned back to her, concern evident in his expression. Be careful. That safe will be well secured. I've been practicing with hairpins on the lock of my jewelry box, Chelsea replied with a determined smile. My fingers remember skills from childhood that would have scandalized my Boston professors. A reluctant grin tugged at Graham's mouth. You continue to surprise me, Chelsea Waimane. I surprise myself lately, she admitted. They waited several more minutes to ensure Clifford and Barnett were truly gone. Then Graham cautiously opened the shed door. The property boundary stood empty in the gathering twilight, no sign of the men who had passed by. Go now, Graham urged. Take the garden path. I'll retrieve the documents once you're safely away. Chelsea hesitated, struggling against the irrational desire to remain with him despite the danger. Be careful, she said finally. Always, he promised, his eyes conveying what propriety forbade his lips from speaking. With a last look, Chelsea slipped from the shed and hurried toward the house, forcing herself not to glance back. The gardens were empty as she entered through the rose arbor, making her way to the side entrance she had used to leave unobserved earlier. She had nearly reached the door when Mrs. Abernathy appeared, her thin face pinched with disapproval. Mrs. Waimane, she said stiffly, Mr. Waimane has been asking for you these past 30 minutes. Chelsea smoothed her skirts, hoping her flushed cheeks might be attributed to her brisk walk. I was in the gardens, she said with practiced casualness. The evening was too pleasant to remain indoors. Mrs. Abernathy's expression suggested she found this explanation lacking, but she merely inclined her head. He awaits you in the drawing room. Colonel Barnett is joining you for dinner. Thank you, Chelsea replied, her heart sinking at the prospect of facing Clifford and Barnett so soon after overhearing their plans. I'll go to him directly. She found Clifford standing by the drawing room window, a glass of brandy in his hand as he looked out over the very grounds she had just traversed. He turned as she entered, his face revealing nothing of his thoughts. "There you are, my dear," he said smoothly. "I was beginning to worry." "The gardens were irresistible this evening," Chelsea replied, moving to the sideboard to pour herself a small sherry, needing the moment to compose her features. "I lost track of time." "Indeed?" Clifford's tone was pleasant enough, yet something in it raised the hair on the back of Chelsea's neck. "Curious that I didn't see you when Colonel Barnett and I rode past the rose garden not 20 minutes ago." Chelsea turned, glass in hand, meeting his gaze with a calmness she didn't feel. "I was walking the eastern path near the old orchard. The apple trees are beginning to fruit." Clifford studied her face, his pale eyes searching for signs of deception. "You seem to favor the eastern portion of the property lately," he observed, "despite my warning about riding in that direction unescorted." "I was walking, not riding," Chelsea corrected gently, "and I stayed within sight of the house." The lie came easier than she might have expected, smoothed by the knowledge of what was at stake. Something in Clifford's expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced, but the arrival of Colonel Barnett prevented further questioning. As Chelsea greeted their dinner guest with practiced graciousness, she felt Clifford's gaze following her every movement, assessing and calculating in a way that sent a chill through her blood. That night, as she prepared for bed, Chelsea caught sight of her reflection in the dressing table mirror. The woman who looked back at her seemed a stranger, outwardly composed but carrying dangerous secrets behind her calm expression. She had committed herself to a path from which there could be no turning back, aligned against the man whose name she bore, and drawn inexorably toward another whose kiss still haunted her thoughts. Sunday's search for the red ledger loomed before her, a risk that could provide the evidence needed to stop Clifford's conspiracy or expose her as a traitor in his house. As Lucy helped her into her nightgown, Chelsea sent up a silent prayer that her hands would remain steady when the moment came, and that the growing feelings between her and Graham wouldn't cloud their judgment before their dangerous mission was complete. For, if they failed, she had no doubt that Clifford Wymain would show no mercy, not to Graham, not to the Pinkertons, and certainly not to the wife who had betrayed him. Chapter 5. The Rising Storm. The red leather ledger continued to elude Chelsea, despite 2 careful searches of Clifford's study during his Sunday meetings with the Cattlemen's Association. The safe proved more challenging than she had anticipated, its lock resisting her improvised attempts with hairpins and slim letter openers. Each failure increased her frustration and heightened her awareness of time slipping away. According to Graham's intelligence, the first phase of the conspiracy would begin in less than 2 weeks. Chelsea sat at her dressing table on Monday morning, mechanically brushing her hair while her mind worked on the problem. There had to be another way to gather evidence, something she was overlooking. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Lucy entered with the morning's correspondence on a small silver tray. "Mr. Wymain asked me to bring these directly to you, ma'am," the maid said. "He said the household accounts need immediate attention." Chelsea accepted the letters with a murmured thanks, noticing Clifford's neat handwriting on the uppermost envelope. As Lucy helped her dress for the day, Chelsea's gaze kept returning to the stack of correspondence. Why would Clifford suddenly entrust her with household accounts he had previously monitored so carefully himself? Once alone, she opened his note first. "My dear Chelsea, pressing business requires my presence in the study today. I've instructed Mrs. Abernathy to bring all household accounts to you for review. Please ensure all telegraph charges are properly categorized. I've noticed some discrepancies in recent bills. Yours, Clifford." The note seemed innocent enough, yet something about it raised Chelsea's suspicions. In 3 months of marriage, Clifford had never before mentioned telegraph charges, nor entrusted her with reviewing them. She dressed quickly and made her way to the morning room where she typically handled correspondence. Mrs. Abernathy was waiting, her thin face as disapproving as ever, a stack of ledgers in her arms. "Mr. Wymain says you're to review these immediately," the housekeeper said, placing the books on the desk with unnecessary force. "The telegraph bills are on top." "Thank you, Mrs. Abernathy," Chelsea replied evenly, refusing to be intimidated by the woman's manner. "I'll attend to them directly." Left alone, Chelsea opened the first ledger. Pages of meticulous entries documented every household expense, from kitchen supplies to stable feed, servants' wages to maintenance costs. Near the back, she found what she sought, a section labeled Communications, containing records of all telegraph messages sent from Wymain Ranch. The entries were straightforward: dates, recipient locations, message lengths, and charges. Nothing unusual appeared until Chelsea reached the entries for the past month. Here she noticed a pattern. Messages sent to Austin, Houston, and San Antonio on the same days each week, always with identical charges, despite presumably different content. More intriguing were entries marked private line usage, substantial charges with no listed recipient. Chelsea hadn't even been aware the ranch had a private telegraph line, though it made sense given its size and Clifford's business interests. Where would such a line be located? Not in Clifford's study, where she had searched thoroughly. Perhaps in another room she hadn't yet explored. Or somewhere outside the main house entirely. Chelsea copied the private line entries onto a separate sheet of paper, then continued reviewing the accounts with careful attention to detail. If Clifford intended this as a test of her attention or loyalty, she would give him no reason for suspicion. 2 hours later, she returned the completed ledgers to Mrs. Abernathy with several minor corrections neatly noted, nothing that would reveal her true interest in the communications records. "Please inform Mr. Wymain that I've reviewed everything and made appropriate notations," Chelsea said pleasantly. "The kitchen accounts in particular could benefit from more detailed tracking of perishable goods." The housekeeper's surprise at Chelsea's thoroughness was poorly concealed. "I'll tell him," she said stiffly before departing. Released from her immediate duties, Chelsea decided to explore the grounds, ostensibly for fresh air, but with a specific purpose in mind. If a private telegraph line existed, it required a connection point, wires, a transmitter, something that might lead her to its location. She walked the perimeter of the house, studying the roofline where telegraph wires might connect. At the eastern corner, partly concealed by a massive oak, she spotted it. A single wire running from the main telegraph line to the edge of the property, not toward the house, but toward the old outbuilding she had seen Clifford visiting during their nighttime meetings. Chelsea's heart quickened. The outbuilding was approximately a quarter mile from the main house, close enough for convenience but far enough for privacy, the perfect location for clandestine communications. She couldn't investigate immediately, not in broad daylight, when her movements could be observed. But tonight, after dinner, perhaps while Clifford was occupied with his evening correspondence, the opportunity came sooner than expected. At luncheon, Clifford announced he would be riding to the north pasture with Jenkins to inspect cattle being readied for market. "I'll be gone until dinner," he told Chelsea. "Perhaps you'd like to continue reviewing those household accounts. I was impressed with your notations this morning." "Thank you," Chelsea replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "I might walk in the gardens first. The fresh air helps clear my mind for figures." "An excellent idea." Clifford's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Though perhaps stay closer to the house today. Jenkins mentioned seeing coyote tracks near the eastern boundary. The warning was clear: stay away from that direction, which only confirmed Chelsea's suspicion that something important was hidden there. "I'll keep to the rose garden," she promised with practiced docility. As soon as Clifford and Jenkins departed, Chelsea returned to her room and changed into a simpler dress, one that wouldn't immediately show dust or grass stains if she needed to conceal herself quickly. She tucked paper and pencil into her pocket, then made her way downstairs, pausing in the kitchen to inform the cook she was taking a light snack to eat in the garden. "The master said you might be wanting something, ma'am," the cook replied, already preparing a small basket. "He asked me specially to make sure you had refreshment this afternoon." Chelsea's skin prickled with awareness. Clifford was ensuring the staff knew exactly where she was supposed to be. "How thoughtful of him," she said, accepting the basket, while inwardly adjusting her plans. She made a show of settling in the rose garden with her basket and a book, making herself visible to anyone watching from the house. After half an hour of apparent reading and occasional sips from the lemonade provided, she gathered her things and walked unhurriedly toward the kitchen garden, a reasonable destination that wouldn't arouse suspicion. From there, a hedgerow provided cover as she made her way east, careful to remain out of sight of the main house. The outbuilding stood in a small clearing, its weathered exterior suggesting age and disuse, a perfect disguise for what Chelsea increasingly believed was the communication center of Clifford's conspiracy. She approached cautiously, alert for any sign of guards or watchers. The building appeared deserted, its single door secured with a heavy padlock. Chelsea circled it slowly, noting the telegraph wire connection at the rear and a small window set high in the wall. Too high to reach without assistance. Frustrated but not defeated, Chelsea retreated to the hedgerow to consider her options. She couldn't break in without tools, and attempting to do so in daylight would be foolhardy. She would need to return after dark, perhaps with Graham's assistance. As she made her way back toward the safety of the garden, a glint of metal caught her eye, something partially buried in the path near the outbuilding. Chelsea knelt, brushing away dirt to reveal a key, its brass surface tarnished but intact. Her heart raced as she slipped it into her pocket. A carelessly dropped key? Or perhaps deliberately hidden as an emergency access point? Either way, it might open the padlock, though attempting to do so now would be too risky. Chelsea returned to the rose garden, making certain she was seen by at least 2 servants before retreating to her room, the key burning like a coal in her pocket. That evening, Clifford returned in unusually high spirits, complimenting the cook on dinner and engaging Chelsea in conversation about books and music, subjects he had largely ignored since their wedding. His sudden attentiveness put her on guard rather than easing it. "I thought we might ride together tomorrow," he suggested as they moved to the drawing room after dinner. "I've neglected showing you the full extent of the property." "I'd enjoy that," Chelsea replied, wondering what purpose lay behind this unexpected invitation. "Excellent." Clifford poured himself a brandy, studying her over the rim of his glass. "Jenkins tells me you've taken quite an interest in the gardens lately." "They're lovely this time of year," she said noncommittally. "Mrs. Abernathy suggested I might want to plan some additional plantings for autumn." Clifford nodded, apparently satisfied with her explanation. "By the way, I meant to ask, did you find anything amiss in the telegraph accounts?" The casual question was too pointed to be coincidental. Chelsea maintained her composure with effort. "Nothing significant," she answered truthfully, "though I did notice the private line usage seems quite regular." "Yes, I conduct most of my business correspondence through that line," Clifford explained smoothly. "More reliable than sending messages through town, and certain matters require discretion." "Of course," Chelsea agreed, "though I confess I wasn't aware we had a private telegraph. Is it here in the house?" Clifford's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "In my study," he lied, "connected directly to my business associates in Austin. Nothing that would interest you, my dear." Chelsea nodded and sipped her sherry, filing away this deliberate falsehood as further evidence of his deception. How fortunate to have such modern conveniences, even here on the frontier. The conversation drifted to safer topics, but Chelsea remained acutely aware of Clifford's attention, more evaluative than affectionate. When she excused herself to retire earlier than usual, claiming a slight headache, his solicitude seemed calculated rather than genuine. "Perhaps we should postpone our ride if you're unwell," he suggested. "I'm sure I'll be fully recovered by morning," Chelsea assured him, not wanting to lose this opportunity to observe more of the property, and perhaps create an opportunity to investigate the outbuilding more thoroughly. In her chamber, with Lucy dismissed for the night, Chelsea removed the key from her pocket and studied it in the lamplight. Its shape suggested it would fit a padlock rather than a door lock, possibly the very padlock securing the outbuilding. She moved to the window, gazing out at the moonlit grounds. The outbuilding was just visible in the distance, a darker shadow against the night sky. Somewhere inside that structure lay answers, perhaps even the coded messages that would provide definitive evidence of the conspiracy. Chelsea's experience as a telegraph operator had given her skills few ladies of her station possessed: the ability to decipher messages sent in dots and dashes, to recognize patterns in seemingly random sequences, to understand the technical aspects of telegraph communication, skills that now might mean the difference between success and failure, perhaps even life and death. She slipped the key into her jewelry box, tucked beneath a modest pearl brooch Clifford would never notice or miss. Tomorrow's ride would give her the opportunity to observe the outbuilding in daylight without arousing suspicion, and tomorrow night, Tomorrow night, she would find a way to use that key. True to his word, Clifford appeared the following morning dressed for riding, his manner cordial, though his eyes remained watchful. Chelsea met him in the entrance hall wearing the riding habit he had commissioned from Austin, her hair neatly coiled beneath a jaunty hat. "You look charming," he said, offering his arm to escort her to the waiting horses. "I've had Athena saddled for you." They rode at a leisurely pace, Clifford pointing out various features of the property. The north pasture, where prime breeding stock grazed, the western fields recently planted with feed corn, the small lake that provided water even in drought years. His pride in Wymain Ranch was evident in every description, his knowledge of its operations impressively detailed. Chelsea listened attentively, asking questions that suggested genuine interest, while noting how carefully he avoided the eastern boundary of Formar Lee property, with its mysterious outbuilding and private telegraph line. "What about the eastern section?" she finally asked as they paused to water the horses at a small stream. "I believe you mentioned acquiring additional land in that direction some years ago." Clifford's expression cooled slightly. "Less picturesque," he said dismissively. "Primarily used for storage and occasional grazing, nothing that would interest you." "I'm interested in all aspects of Wymain Ranch," Chelsea persisted gently. "After all, as your wife, I should understand your holdings completely." Something flickered in Clifford's pale eyes. Calculation, perhaps, or suspicion? Then his expression cleared. "Of course, my dear, how remiss of me." He gestured toward the east. "We can ride along the boundary if you wish, though I'm afraid there's little to see but scrubland and a few old buildings awaiting renovation." As they rode eastward, Chelsea was acutely aware of Clifford's attention shifting between her and their surroundings, as if he expected something or someone to appear. When they crested a small rise, the outbuilding came into view, its weathered exterior more visible in daylight than it had been during her previous approach. "One of the original structures," Clifford explained with calculation, "built by the previous owner for storage, though now we use it primarily for record keeping." "Record keeping?" Chelsea echoed, careful to sound merely curious rather than keenly interested. "Cattle lineages, breeding records, that sort of thing." Clifford's hand tightened on his reins, causing his horse to dance sideways nervously. "Dull business matters, documented by my manager." The lie was so smooth that Chelsea might have believed it had she not seen the telegraph wire and padlocked door. She nodded, allowing the subject to drop as they continued their circuit of the property. By the time they returned to the main house, Chelsea's mind was whirling with plans and possibilities. The outbuilding was less isolated than she had initially thought, visible from several vantage points around the property. Approaching it unobserved would require careful timing and likely Graham's assistance. As they dismounted, Clifford handed the reins to a waiting stable hand. Not Graham, Chelsea noted with disappointment. She had hoped for even a brief glimpse of him, some way to signal her discovery. "I have news I've been saving," Clifford announced as they climbed the steps to the veranda. "I must travel to Austin tomorrow on business, legislative matters regarding water rights that require personal attention." Chelsea's pulse quickened at this unexpected development. "How long will you be away?" 3 days, possibly 4. Clifford studied her reaction carefully. "I trust the household will run smoothly in my absence." "Of course," she assured him, concealing her surge of excitement. "I'll ensure everything remains in perfect order." "I'm certain you will." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Jenkins will remain here to oversee the ranch operations and attend to any difficulties that might arise." The implication was clear. Jenkins would be watching her. Chelsea maintained her pleasant expression with effort. "How thoughtful of you to arrange everything so carefully." Clifford's hand closed around her arm as they entered the house, his fingers pressing more firmly than necessary. "I value what's mine, Chelsea," he said quietly. "I protect my interests with great thoroughness." The veiled threat sent a chill through her, but Chelsea met his gaze steadily. "As any wise businessman should," she replied. That evening, as they prepared for dinner, Lucy brought an unexpected message to Chelsea's dressing room. "Mr. Wymain asks if you would join him in his study after dinner, ma'am," the maid said as she fastened the buttons on Chelsea's gown. He says he has instructions regarding household matters during his absence. Thank you, Lucy, Chelsea replied, her mind racing. The study. Where? She had twice searched unsuccessfully for the red ledger, where Clifford claimed the non-existent private telegraph line was located. Dinner passed with polite conversation, Clifford inquiring about her plans during his absence with apparent casualness. Chelsea described her intention to inventory the library and perhaps plan autumn plantings for the kitchen garden, innocent activities that would give no cause for concern. Admirable industry, Clifford commented, pushing away his barely touched dessert. Shall we move to the study? There are several matters requiring discussion before my departure. The study was exactly as Chelsea remembered from her previous searches. The massive desk positioned to command the room, bookshelves lining the walls, a large safe set into the corner behind an oriental screen. Nothing suggested a telegraph line or equipment. Clifford gestured for her to sit in one of the leather chairs facing the desk while he remained standing, moving to a cabinet from which he withdrew a decanter of brandy. During my absence, certain communications may arrive requiring immediate attention, he began, pouring himself a generous measure. Business matters primarily, though possibly some political correspondence as well. Chelsea nodded attentively. Shall I forward them to you in Austin? That won't be necessary. Clifford opened a drawer in his desk, removing a small brass key. Any telegrams marked priority should be placed in this drawer and locked until my return. He inserted the key in the lock, demonstrating the mechanism. No one but you is to handle such messages. Is that clear? Perfectly, Chelsea agreed, accepting the key he offered. Though, I'm surprised you would entrust such important matters to me rather than Jenkins or your business manager. Clifford's smile was thin. My business manager is accompanying me to Austin, and Jenkins, while loyal, lacks the education to properly handle correspondence. He sipped his brandy, regarding her over the rim of the glass. Besides, my dear, you've proven yourself quite capable with the household accounts. It's time you assumed more substantive responsibilities. The sudden delegation of authority was too convenient to be coincidental. Chelsea suspected a test or a trap. I'm honored by your trust, she said carefully. Trust must be earned, Clifford replied, his tone hardening slightly, and maintained through appropriate behavior. The implicit warning hung in the air between them. Chelsea met his gaze without flinching. I understand completely. I thought you might. Clifford set down his glass with deliberate precision. More matter. During my absence, I've instructed Jenkins to accompany you should you wish to ride or walk beyond the immediate grounds. The coyotes I mentioned have become something of a concern. How thoughtful, Chelsea responded, the words tasting bitter on her tongue. Though I had hoped to have Graham continue my riding lessons with Athena. He's been most helpful in improving my seat. Clifford's eyes narrowed fractionally. Lee has other duties assigned during my absence. Jenkins will attend to any equestrian needs you might have. So, Graham too would be kept occupied and away from her. The calculation behind these arrangements was becoming increasingly clear. Now, Clifford continued, his tone lightening artificially, let me show you something few others have seen. He moved to the bookshelf behind his desk and pulled on a volume of Shakespeare. Romeo and Juliet, Chelsea noted with ironic awareness. A section of the shelf swung outward, revealing a hidden compartment. My private telegraph, Clifford announced with evident satisfaction. Chelsea rose to look, careful to display appropriate surprise rather than the skepticism she felt. The compartment contained what appeared at first glance to be telegraph equipment, a key set on a wooden base, a sounder for receiving messages, and a small roll of paper tape. But to her experienced eye, the apparatus was immediately suspect. The key was an older model, its contacts worn and unlikely to transmit effectively. The sounder was disconnected, its wires leading nowhere. The entire setup was theatrical rather than functional. How ingenious, she said, playing her role as the impressed wife. I had no idea such a thing was possible within a private home. Modern technology offers remarkable advantages to those with the vision to employ it, Clifford replied, clearly pleased with her reaction. This connects directly to my associates in Austin and beyond, allowing for immediate communication on sensitive matters. Chelsea nodded, noting the complete absence of external wires that would be necessary for any actual telegraph to function. Remarkable indeed. Clifford closed the hidden compartment with a sharp click. I trust you now understand why certain messages must be handled with absolute discretion. Completely, Chelsea assured him, her mind working rapidly. The fake telegraph confirmed her suspicions. The real communications happened elsewhere, almost certainly in the padlocked outbuilding. This elaborate charade was meant to mislead her, perhaps even to test whether she would reveal her knowledge of telegraphy by questioning its obvious flaws. Good, Clifford said with finality. I depart at first light tomorrow. Jenkins will report to you each morning for any instructions regarding the property, though I've left detailed guidance for all routine matters. As Chelsea prepared for bed that night, her thoughts raced with possibilities. Clifford's absence provided an unprecedented opportunity, yet the watchful presence of Jenkins threatened to constrain her movements. From her window, she could see lights burning in the stables. Graham working late, perhaps, or simply unable to sleep like herself. She longed to speak with him, to share her discoveries and plan their next steps together. But with Jenkins already assuming his watchdog role, any direct communication would be dangerous. She removed the small brass key from her pocket, the key to the desk drawer where priority messages would be stored. Another key, the tarnished one she had found near the outbuilding, remained hidden in her jewelry box. 2 keys to 2 different locks, both potentially vital to uncovering the evidence they sought. As Chelsea extinguished her lamp and slipped between the cool sheets, she thought of Graham, his quiet strength, his unwavering purpose, the brief moment of connection they had shared before duty reasserted itself. Somewhere on this vast property, he too was planning, watching, waiting for an opportunity. Clifford's trip to Austin wasn't merely business. Graham's intelligence suggested a meeting of the conspiracy's leadership to finalize plans for their coordinated attacks. Time was running desperately short. Whatever chance Clifford's absence provided, Chelsea knew they must seize it, regardless of the risks. The sound of horses in the pre-dawn darkness woke her from restless sleep. Clifford was departing for Austin, taking with him his business manager and 2 ranch hands as escort. From her window, Chelsea watched them ride away, Clifford's straight-backed figure silhouetted against the lightening eastern sky. 3 days of opportunity and danger lay ahead. Evading Jenkins proved easier than Chelsea had anticipated. The foreman's watchfulness, while persistent, was hampered by his other responsibilities managing the ranch in Clifford's absence. By the second day, Chelsea had established a pattern of predictable activities. Needlework in the morning room, reading in the garden, brief walks that never strayed beyond the immediate grounds. That seemed to satisfy his surveillance. What Jenkins didn't know was that Chelsea had discovered a forgotten servants' passage, connecting the wine cellar to an old storage shed near the kitchen gardens. Once used to transport goods during inclement weather, the narrow tunnel provided perfect cover for nighttime excursions. At midnight on Clifford's second day away, Chelsea slipped from her bedroom, dressed in her darkest skirt and shawl. Lucy had been dismissed hours earlier with a mild sleeping powder added to her evening tea, insurance against the maid's potential discovery of her absence. The household slept as Chelsea navigated the main staircase, avoiding the 3rd step from the bottom that always creaked under pressure. The night air carried the scent of sage and distant rain as she emerged from the storage shed and made her way toward the eastern boundary. No lantern guided her path. Moonlight and memory would have to suffice. Her heart pounded with equal parts fear and anticipation, not merely of the danger, but of seeing Graham without the constraints of watchful eyes. He was waiting at the hollow oak, a darker shadow among shadows. Chelsea approached silently, but Graham turned before she reached him, his senses sharpened by months of clandestine activity. "You came," he said softly, relief evident in his voice. "I wasn't certain you'd manage to slip away." "Jenkins is attentive but predictable," Chelsea replied, moving closer. "He checks the house at 10 and again at 6 before the staff rises." Graham's smile flashed briefly in the darkness. "You've become quite the spy, Mrs. Wymain." "Necessity teaches quickly," she said, unable to suppress an answering smile. "Did you receive my message about the outbuilding?" Graham nodded. All business now. "I observed it yesterday while repairing fence posts nearby. It's definitely a telegraph station. I could hear the sounder through the window when I passed." "I found a key," Chelsea told him, withdrawing the tarnished brass object from her pocket. "Near the path leading to the building. It might open the padlock." Graham examined it in the moonlight. "Possibly. Though approaching the building remains dangerous, Turner's men patrol that section regularly, especially with Wymain away. There must be a way, Chelsea insisted. If that's where the coded messages are received and sent, it could provide the evidence we need. Agreed. Graham gestured toward the hollow in the tree. I've compiled what we have so far. It's substantial, but still circumstantial. Without the red ledger or direct evidence of the communication network, the authorities might hesitate to move against men of Wymain's standing. Chelsea watched as Graham withdrew a leather portfolio from the hollow oak. He spread its contents on a flat rock nearby, maps with locations marked, notes on meetings and conversations overheard, receipts for unusual shipments, names of conspirators with their roles carefully documented. You've been thorough, she said, impressed by the detailed record. 5 years of waiting for justice teaches patience, Graham replied, his voice tightening. Every note, every observation might be the piece that brings Wymain to account, not just for the conspiracy, but for my father's murder. Chelsea touched his arm gently. We'll find the evidence we need. His hand covered hers, warm despite the cool night air. We've already risked too much. Your position is particularly dangerous if Wymain suspects you've allied against him. He doesn't, Chelsea assured him, though uncertainty flickered at the edges of her confidence. He believes I'm exactly what he wanted, a decorative, obedient wife with no interest beyond household matters. You've never been merely decorative, Graham said quietly. Not to anyone who truly sees you. The simple statement, delivered without artifice, pierced Chelsea's carefully maintained composure. She looked up at Graham in the moonlight, struck by the sincerity in his gaze. How can you be so certain of who I am? She asked. We've known each other such a short time. Graham's expression softened. I've known you longer than you realize. What do you mean? He hesitated, then seemed to reach a decision. When the Pinkertons first approached me about infiltrating Wymain Ranch, I spent weeks in Redemption learning the town, understanding Wymain's connections there. His voice gentled. I saw you at the telegraph office every day, watching how you handled difficult customers with patience, how you helped the widow Watson draft letters to her son back east, how you counted pennies while purchasing supplies, yet always spared something for the Collins boys selling newspapers. Chelsea stared at him, startled by this revelation. You were watching me before we ever met? Not as an assignment, he hastened to clarify, but I couldn't help noticing you. The way you held yourself with dignity despite reduced circumstances. The kindness you showed others, even when you were clearly exhausted. His voice dropped lower. The quiet strength in your eyes when you thought no one was looking. Something unfurled in Chelsea's chest. A warmth that spread outward, melting the ice that had formed around her heart during months of living in Clifford's cold, calculating world. When Wymain began courting you, Graham continued, I wanted to warn you somehow. But what could I say? I had no proof then, only suspicions. And you seemed... He paused, searching for the right words. Desperate? Chelsea suggested, a sad smile touching her lips. Determined, Graham corrected. Making the best choice available to protect your family. His fingers tightened gently around hers. I respected your sacrifice, even as I regretted the circumstances that made it necessary. Chelsea turned away, overwhelmed by his perception and the emotions it evoked. My marriage to Clifford was never built on love, she admitted quietly. It was a business arrangement from the beginning, my social graces and appearance in exchange for financial security for my mother and sister. She shook her head. I told myself it was enough, that affection might grow with time, or at least mutual respect. And instead you discovered his true nature, Graham said. Yes. Chelsea looked back at him, no longer hiding the truth in her heart. And found something else I hadn't expected. The air between them changed, charged with unspoken feelings too powerful to dismiss any longer. Graham stepped closer, close enough that Chelsea could feel the warmth radiating from his body. When this is over, he said, his voice rough with emotion, when Wymain's conspiracy is exposed and he faces justice for his crimes, what then, Chelsea? The question hung between them, heavy with implications and possibilities. My marriage would be nullified, she said slowly, thinking it through. No court would uphold a union to a man convicted of treason and conspiracy. The property he acquired through fraud would be restored to its rightful owners. She met Graham's gaze steadily. Including the Lee Ranch to you. And you? Graham asked softly. What would you want then, with your freedom restored? The directness of his question demanded equal honesty. Chelsea took a deep breath. A chance to build a life based on truth and genuine feeling, not convenience or necessity. Her voice faltered slightly. A chance to follow my heart rather than my circumstances. Graham's hand rose to her cheek, his touch gentle as his fingers traced the curve of her face. And where would your heart lead you? Words failed her then. Chelsea leaned into his touch, closing the distance between them with a courage born of certainty. Their lips met in a kiss that held none of the hesitation of their first encounter, only recognition, homecoming, and a promise of possibilities neither had dared voice aloud. Graham's arms encircled her, drawing her closer as the kiss deepened. Chelsea felt something within her unfurling, like a flower long kept in darkness suddenly exposed to sunlight. This was what a true connection felt like. Not the calculated exchanges of her marriage, but something alive and genuine. When they finally parted, Graham rested his forehead against hers, his breathing unsteady. "I never intended this," he whispered. "When I came to Wyman Ranch, revenge and justice were my only purposes." "Life rarely follows our intentions," Chelsea replied, her own voice uneven. "Sometimes it offers something better instead." Graham brushed a strand of hair from her face with infinite tenderness. "When this is over," he said, "I'll rebuild my father's ranch. The land has been neglected, but not ruined. It could flourish again with proper care." "It sounds wonderful," Chelsea said, allowing herself to imagine such a future, one free from conspiracy and deception, built on honest work and genuine feeling. "It would be," Graham agreed, his eyes holding hers, "with the right partner." The implication was clear, and Chelsea didn't shy from it. "I would like that," she said simply. "To build something true from all this falsehood." For a moment, they stood together beneath the ancient oak, sheltered by its spreading branches, as they allowed themselves to envision a future beyond the dangerous present. Then, reluctantly, Graham stepped back, reality reasserting itself. "We should focus on the immediate concerns," he said, though his eyes still held the warmth of their shared moment. "The outbuilding first. If we can access the telegraph equipment, your skills might decode their communication network." Chelsea nodded, forcing her mind back to the conspiracy and the evidence they still needed. "Tomorrow night," she suggested. "Jenkins will be occupied with the weekly inventory. I can slip away after midnight and meet you at the east fence line. I'll bring tools for the lock in case your key doesn't work," Graham said. "But Chelsea..." He caught her hand again, his expression grave. "If anything seems wrong, if you sense any change in the household routine or increased surveillance, don't come. The risk is too great." "I'll be careful," she promised. They spent another hour reviewing the evidence they had gathered and planning their approach to the outbuilding. When the time came to part, Graham walked with her as far as the kitchen gardens, keeping to the shadows. "Until tomorrow night," he said, reluctance evident in his voice as he prepared to leave her. Chelsea impulsively rose on tiptoe and pressed a swift kiss to his lips. "Until tomorrow," she echoed, then turned and slipped back toward the servants' passage, her heart lighter than it had been in months, despite the dangers that still surrounded them. The household was silent as Chelsea emerged from the wine cellar and made her way up the servants' stairs. She had timed her return perfectly, 3:30, when even the earliest risers among the staff would still be deep in slumber. The main floor was dark, save for a single lamp left burning low in the entrance hall, standard practice when Clifford was away. Chelsea moved silently through the house, her thoughts still lingering on the hollow oak and Graham's revelations. For the first time since her father's death had derailed her education and future, she allowed herself to imagine happiness, real happiness, not merely security or stability. A life built on mutual respect and genuine affection, where her mind and abilities were valued rather than merely tolerated. So absorbed was she in these unprecedented thoughts that Chelsea nearly missed the strip of light visible beneath Clifford's study door. She froze mid-step, her heart suddenly pounding. The study should be empty, locked until Clifford's return as he had instructed. She backed away silently, intending to retreat to her room by another route, when the study door opened. Clifford himself stepped into the hallway, still dressed in his traveling clothes, his expression hardening as he spotted her. "Chelsea," he said, her name carrying the weight of accusation in his mouth. "You're awake at an unusual hour." Every instinct screamed danger, but Chelsea forced herself to appear merely startled rather than terrified. "Clifford, you've returned early. We weren't expecting you until tomorrow." "Clearly," he replied, his gaze taking in her attire. The dark skirt and shawl she had worn for her clandestine meeting, so different from her usual night clothes. "You seem dressed for the occasion." Chelsea's mind raced, searching for a plausible explanation. "I couldn't sleep," she said, instinct guiding her toward a partial truth. "The house feels different when you're away. I've been restless since midnight." She gestured vaguely toward the rear of the house. "I went out to look at the stars. The night is exceptionally clear." Clifford studied her face with unnerving intensity. "Stargazing," he repeated, the word dripping with skepticism. "Alone? At 3 a.m? "The constellation Cygnus is particularly visible in the summer sky," Chelsea replied, drawing on astronomy lessons from her college days. "My father taught me to identify it when I was a child. Watching it sometimes helps quiet my thoughts." Something shifted in Clifford's expression. Not quite belief, but perhaps uncertainty about her explanation. "You should have informed Jenkins of your nocturnal habits," he said. "The property isn't safe for solitary wanderings day or night." "I remained in the garden," Chelsea assured him, adding a note of contrition to her voice. "I apologize if I caused concern. Your early return took me by surprise." Clifford's penetrating gaze held hers a moment longer before he nodded curtly. "The business in Austin concluded more rapidly than anticipated. I saw no reason to delay my return." "I'm glad you're home safely," Chelsea said, the lie bitter on her tongue. "Shall I have the kitchen prepare something? You must be hungry after traveling." "That won't be necessary." Clifford glanced toward the staircase. "It's late. We should retire. Tomorrow brings important matters requiring discussion." Relief flooded through Chelsea at this reprieve, though she knew the danger had merely been postponed, not eliminated. "Of course. Good night, Clifford." "Good night," he echoed, his tone suggesting the conversation was far from concluded. In her bedroom, Chelsea changed quickly into her nightgown, her hands trembling slightly as she removed the dark skirt and shawl that had nearly betrayed her. Clifford's unexpected return complicated everything. The planned expedition to the telegraph outbuilding would need to be postponed, their communication more carefully guarded than ever. Most troubling was the timing. Why had Clifford cut short his Austin trip? Had he received information that aroused his suspicions? Or was his return part of the conspiracy's acceleration as the planned attacks drew nearer? Sleep eluded her for what remained of the night. Chelsea lay awake, listening for any sound that might indicate Clifford approaching her room with further questions. None came, but the silence felt ominous rather than reassuring. Morning arrived with leaden skies threatening rain. A fitting backdrop to the tension Chelsea felt as she dressed for breakfast. Lucy seemed oblivious to any household disruption, chattering about Mr. Wymane's unexpected return as she arranged Chelsea's hair. "Cook was in such a state, ma'am," the maid reported, "having to prepare a proper breakfast with no warning, and Mrs. Abernathy checking every room twice over to make sure everything was just so." "I'm sure Mr. Wymane understands the circumstances," Chelsea replied, pinning a cameo brooch to her high-necked morning dress. Armor of respectability for whatever confrontation might lie ahead. Clifford was already seated at the breakfast table when she entered the dining room. The Austin newspaper open beside his plate. He rose with practiced courtesy as she approached. "Good morning, my dear," he said, his manner betraying nothing of their nighttime encounter. "I trust you slept well after your astronomical observations." The subtle barb wasn't lost on Chelsea, but she maintained her composure. "Quite well, thank you. Was your journey comfortable?" "Efficient, if not particularly pleasant," Clifford replied, returning to his seat as a servant poured coffee for Chelsea. "The roads are dusty this time of year." They maintained polite conversation through the meal. discussing inconsequential matters while servants moved in and out of the room. Only when coffee was served and the staff dismissed did Clifford's demeanor change, his pleasant expression hardening into something more calculated. "I've made a decision during my absence," he announced, setting aside his napkin with deliberate precision. "Wyoming Ranch will host a celebration for Texas Independence Day next week." Chelsea's surprise was genuine. Independence Day? But that's celebrated in March, surely? "The official holiday, yes," Clifford acknowledged. "But I see no reason why patriotic Texans cannot celebrate their heritage in July as well, particularly when certain influential guests are available to attend." Something in his tone raised warning flags in Chelsea's mind. "What guests did you have in mind?" "Governor Richardson has tentatively accepted, along with General Wade from Fort Davis," Clifford said, satisfaction evident in his voice. "Judge Hamilton, Colonel Barnett, and Senator Davis will attend, of course, along with several other prominent men whose support is crucial to Texas's future prosperity." The names were familiar to Chelsea, all men Graham had identified as key figures in the conspiracy. This was no ordinary social gathering, but a cover for bringing the conspirators together just before their planned attacks. "It's very short notice for such an important event," Chelsea observed carefully. "Which is why you'll need to focus all your attention on preparations," Clifford replied. "Mrs. Abernathy has the staff well in hand, but as hostess, you'll be responsible for ensuring our guests experience the legendary hospitality of Wyoming Ranch." "Of course," Chelsea agreed, her mind racing with implications. "How many guests should we expect?" 40 or 50 for the dinner and ball," Clifford said. "A dozen will stay overnight, those with particular interest in our region's development." Development? A polite euphemism for whatever violent disruption they planned. Chelsea nodded, already calculating how this unexpected event might be turned to advantage. With so many conspirators gathered in one place, evidence of their collective involvement might be easier to obtain. "I'll begin planning immediately," she said, adopting the eager manner of a wife pleased to showcase her husband's prominence. "The ballroom hasn't been used since our wedding. It will need attention." "Indeed." Clifford studied her with unnervingly focused attention. "This celebration is important, Chelsea, perhaps the most significant event in Wyoming Ranch's history. I expect nothing less than perfection." "You'll have it," she promised, the double meaning of her words hidden behind a pleasant smile. Clifford nodded, apparently satisfied with her response. "Jenkins will coordinate security arrangements. The property boundaries will be patrolled day and night leading up to the event. For the safety of our distinguished guests, of course." The message couldn't have been clearer. The ranch would be under heightened surveillance, making clandestine movements even more dangerous. Chelsea's planned meeting with Graham at the outbuilding would be impossible under such conditions. "A wise precaution," she agreed, her mind already seeking alternatives. "Will the stable hands be involved in these security measures? I had hoped to continue my riding lessons this week." "The stable staff will have additional duties preparing for guests' arrival," Clifford said dismissively. "Your riding lessons can resume after the celebration." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Unless there's some particular reason you're eager to visit the stables, only Athena," Chelsea replied smoothly. "She becomes difficult when her exercise routine is disrupted. But I understand the circumstances." The conversation shifted to practical details of the upcoming event, but Chelsea remained acutely aware of Clifford's scrutiny. His early return, the suddenly announced celebration, the increased security, all suggested accelerating plans and perhaps growing suspicion. As she left the dining room to begin her hostess duties, Chelsea caught sight of movement near the stables. Graham, leading a horse toward the paddock. Even at this distance, she recognized the set of his shoulders, the careful way he handled the nervous animal. For a moment, their eyes met across the expanse of lawn, an entire unspoken conversation passing between them in that brief connection. Then Jenkins appeared at Graham's side, delivering what appeared to be instructions that drew his attention away. The moment passed, but its message lingered. Whatever challenges Clifford's return created, they would face them together. The stakes were too high, the potential cost of failure too devastating to consider any other course. The Texas Independence Day celebration would bring the conspiracy's leadership together under one roof, a gathering of wolves planning the slaughter of lambs across the state. But wolves could be tracked, their plans documented, their intended violence prevented if the right evidence could be secured in time. Chelsea squared her shoulders and moved purposefully toward the morning room, where Mrs. Abernathy would be waiting with endless lists of preparations. The next week would test her resolve and ingenuity to their limits, but for the first time since coming to Wymean Ranch, she had something beyond duty or necessity to sustain her, a vision of possibility, of a future worth fighting for, no matter what dangers lay ahead. Chapter 6: Betrayal's Price. The preparations for the Texas Independence Day celebration consumed every waking hour of the next 5 days. Chelsea moved through a whirlwind of activities, planning menus, arranging accommodations for overnight guests, supervising the cleaning of the rarely used ballroom, all while maintaining a facade of wifely enthusiasm that grew more difficult to sustain with each passing day. Communicating with Graham proved nearly impossible under Clifford's heightened security measures. Jenkins seemed omnipresent, appearing whenever Chelsea ventured near the stables or gardens. The single message she managed to pass, a note concealed in Athena's saddle blanket during a brief, supervised riding session, contained only the barest essentials. Celebration is cover for final meeting. Attacks imminent. Need red ledger. Graham's response, delivered through the stable boy who brought fresh flowers daily for the house, was equally brief. Pinkertons notified. Reinforcements coming. 2 days. 2 days. The day after the celebration. Chelsea's heart had sunk at the realization. Whatever evidence they needed must be secured before the conspirators dispersed to their various positions, ready to launch the coordinated violence that would plunge Texas back into chaos. On the morning of the celebration, Clifford sequestered himself in his study with Colonel Barnett and Judge Hamilton, who had arrived the previous evening. Chelsea seized this rare opportunity to search the private rooms that had been progressively closed to her over recent weeks. Her own movements through the house raised no suspicion. As hostess, she needed to inspect every detail before guests arrived. She began in the guest chambers, methodically checking each room while seeking any hidden documents the early arrivals might have brought. Finding nothing of consequence, she made her way to the master suite, Clifford's private domain, connected to her own chambers by a door that had remained locked since their wedding night. The key she had secretly copied from Clifford's ring weeks earlier turned smoothly in the lock. Chelsea slipped inside, her heart pounding as she surveyed the masculine quarters. A massive 4-poster bed dominated one wall, its dark mahogany matching the heavy wardrobe and chest of drawers opposite. A writing desk stood beneath the window, its surface meticulously organized with correspondence materials. Chelsea moved quickly, conscious that servants might enter at any moment to prepare Clifford's evening attire. The wardrobe yielded nothing unusual. The writing desk contained only blank paper and mundane correspondence. Her hopes fading, she turned to the chest of drawers. The bottom drawer stuck slightly different from the smooth action of the others. Chelsea knelt, examining it more carefully. The craftsmanship was exquisite, with no visible irregularities, yet something felt wrong. She ran her fingers along the interior, pressing gently against the wooden base. A subtle click rewarded her persistence. The false bottom shifted, revealing a hidden compartment beneath. Chelsea's breath caught in her throat as she lifted the concealed panel. Inside lay a slim volume bound in red leather, the elusive ledger Graham had described. With trembling fingers, she opened it, finding page after page of meticulous entries in Clifford's precise handwriting, names, dates, locations. The entire conspiracy laid out with chilling efficiency. Columns listed neutralization targets, with federal marshals' names, telegraph office locations, and railway junctions marked for simultaneous sabotage. Most damning was a detailed timeline for what was labeled Texas Restoration, beginning with tomorrow's date and culminating 3 weeks later with the installation of provisional government. Chelsea worked feverishly, copying the most incriminating entries onto paper she had hidden in her skirt pocket. The evidence before her was comprehensive enough to implicate dozens of prominent men across Texas, not just in planning violence, but in orchestrating what amounted to a second rebellion against the United States government. So absorbed was she in this task that she failed to hear the approaching footsteps until the bedroom door opened. Chelsea looked up, her hands frozen in the act of transcribing, to find Mrs. Abernathy standing in the doorway, her thin face registering first shock, then understanding. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. Chelsea slowly closed the ledger, her mind racing for an explanation that might satisfy the housekeeper's rigid loyalty to Clifford. "Mrs. Abernathy," she said at last, struggling to keep her voice steady. I can see what you were just doing, Mrs. Wymain," the housekeeper interrupted, her tone glacial. "Going through the master's private papers like a common thief." "It's not what it appears," Chelsea began, rising to her feet, the incriminating papers still clutched in her hand. "Isn't it?" Mrs. Abernathy's gaze shifted to the open drawer with its revealed compartment. "I've served the Wymain family for 15 years, through war and peace. I know what loyalty means, even if you do not." Chelsea took a steadying breath, calculating her options. Pleading would accomplish nothing with this woman whose devotion to Clifford was absolute. Perhaps a different approach might succeed. "Mrs. Abernathy," she said quietly, "you've managed this household with exceptional skill. Your position here is invaluable, yet I imagine the compensation hardly reflects your true worth." The housekeeper's eyes narrowed. "Are you attempting to bribe me, Mrs. Wymain?" "I'm suggesting that your talents deserve greater recognition," Chelsea replied carefully. "I have resources of my own. My family in Redemption has connections with several prominent households seeking experienced staff. With the right recommendation, your salary might double." A thin smile curved Mrs. Abernathy's lips, devoid of warmth or humor. "How little you understand the people who serve Wymain Ranch. Money may have purchased your loyalty, Mrs. Wymain, but some of us believe in something greater than personal gain." Chelsea recognized the futility of further persuasion. "What do you intend to do?" "My duty," the housekeeper replied simply, stepping backward into the hallway. "Mr. Wymain will be informed immediately of what I've witnessed." "Wait!" Chelsea started forward, but Mrs. Abernathy had already turned, moving with surprising speed for a woman of her years. Chelsea stood frozen in indecision. The ledger remained in the drawer, the false bottom now exposed. If she replaced everything and denied the housekeeper's accusation, it would be her word against Mrs. But Clifford would certainly investigate, and the disturbed hiding place would confirm the allegation. Decision made. Chelsea quickly finished copying the final critical entries, then replaced the ledger exactly as she had found it, sliding the false bottom back into position. The drawer closed smoothly, showing no evidence of tampering. She tucked the incriminating notes into her bodice, the safest hiding place available. Moving to the connecting door between their chambers, Chelsea locked it again from Clifford's side, then hurried through her own room to the hallway. She needed to reach Graham immediately, to warn him of their exposure and accelerate whatever plans the Pinkertons had made. She had nearly reached the main staircase when Jenkins appeared, his weathered face expressionless. "Mrs. Wymain," he said, touching his hat brim in a gesture that might have seemed respectful if not for the watchfulness in his eyes. "Mr. Wymain requests your presence in his study. Immediately." Chelsea's heart hammered against her ribs, but she maintained an outward calm. "Of course, I was just checking the guest rooms one final time before our visitors arrived." Jenkins said nothing, merely gesturing toward the staircase with an "after you" motion that made it clear he would escort her personally to ensure her arrival. As they descended, Chelsea caught a glimpse through the front windows of activity near the stables. Graham stood beside Athena's stall, seemingly occupied with the mare's grooming. As if sensing her gaze, he glanced toward the house. Even at this distance, Chelsea could read the tension in his posture. Jenkins must have noted her attention. "Lee's been reassigned," he said with deliberate casualness. "Mr. Wymain feels his skills are needed elsewhere today." A warning thinly disguised. Chelsea nodded, as if the information held no particular interest for her, though dread pooled in her stomach. If Graham was being watched as well, their chances of communicating before the Pinkertons arrived had just diminished considerably. Jenkins escorted her to Clifford's study door, knocking once before opening it without waiting for a response. "Mrs. Wyman, sir," he announced, then stepped aside to allow her entry. Clifford stood behind his desk, his posture rigid with controlled anger. Mrs. Abernathy stood nearby, her expression vindicated. To Chelsea's surprise, Turner, the head of security, was also present, his hand resting meaningfully on the pistol at his hip. "That will be all, Mrs. Abernathy," Clifford said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Please ensure we are not disturbed. The final preparations for this evening require your supervision." The housekeeper curtsied and departed, casting a final triumphant glance at Chelsea as she passed. "Jenkins, remain outside the door," Clifford continued. "No one enters without my express permission." When the door closed, leaving her alone with Clifford and the armed Turner, Chelsea forced herself to meet her husband's gaze directly, refusing to show the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. "Searching my private quarters," Clifford began without preamble, "copying confidential documents, conspiring with a stable hand against your husband's interests." He shook his head slowly. "I expected better judgment from a woman of your intelligence, Chelsea." "I don't know what Mrs. Abernathy told you," Chelsea said, clinging to the possibility, however remote, of maintaining her deception. "But I was merely—" "Spare me your improvisations," Clifford interrupted coldly. "Your betrayal extends well beyond today's discovery. Did you think I was unaware of your midnight meetings with Lee? Your coded messages, your attempts to access the telegraph outbuilding?" The comprehensive list of her activities stunned Chelsea into momentary silence. She had underestimated Clifford's surveillance and his patience in allowing her to continue while he gathered evidence of her duplicity. "You've known all along?" she said finally, the truth dawning with sickening clarity. "Not all along," Clifford corrected, moving from behind the desk to stand before her. "You played the role of dutiful wife convincingly at first. It was your interest in Lee that aroused my suspicions. A well-bred woman doesn't develop such fascination with a stable hand unless something unusual is occurring. You had us watched," Chelsea concluded. "Naturally." Clifford's tone suggested this was the only reasonable response. "Turn's men reported your first clandestine meeting at the property boundary. After that, it was simply a matter of observing how far your betrayal would extend." A cold smile touched his lips. "I must admit, your resourcefulness exceeded my expectations. A pity you didn't apply such ingenuity to furthering my interests rather than opposing them." Chelsea straightened her spine, abandoning all pretense of innocence. "Your interests include treason against the United States government and plots to murder federal officials. Did you expect me to support such actions once I discovered them?" Something flickered in Clifford's eyes, surprise, perhaps, at her directness. "So Lee shared his suspicions with you. How much do you actually know?" "Everything," Chelsea replied, deciding that full disclosure might be her only leverage. "The coordinated attacks on telegraph offices and railways, the assassinations planned for federal marshals and Reconstruction officials, the stockpiled weapons at your distribution points across Texas." She gestured toward his desk. "All documented in your red ledger, with your signature authorizing each phase of what you call Texas Restoration, but is actually a second rebellion." Clifford studied her face for a long moment, then turned to Turner. "Search her. Thoroughly." Chelsea stiffened as Turner approached, his expression impassive as he held out his hand. "The papers, Mrs. Wymain," he said flatly. "No need to make this unpleasant." With as much dignity as she could muster, Chelsea withdrew the folded sheets from her bodice and surrendered them. Turner handed them to Clifford without examining their contents. "You've created quite a difficult situation," Clifford said as he scanned the pages, his voice almost conversational. "These notes, while incomplete, contain enough information to be problematic if they reach certain parties." He set the papers on his desk, then fixed Chelsea with a penetrating stare. "What exactly did you and Lee intend to do with this information?" Chelsea weighed her response carefully. If Clifford didn't know about the Pinkertons, revealing that connection might endanger Graham further. Yet she needed to buy time until reinforcements arrived. "We intended to prevent innocent bloodshed," she said finally. "The violence you're planning will harm countless people who have nothing to do with your political grievances." "Political grievances?" Clifford's voice hardened. "Is that what you think this is? Some petty disagreement about policy?" He moved to the window, gazing out toward the eastern boundary where the former Lee property lay. "The South wasn't merely defeated, Chelsea. It was betrayed, humiliated, and systematically dismantled by Northern interests who cared nothing for our way of life or our rightful place in this nation. The way of life you're defending was built on human bondage." Chelsea replied quietly. Clifford turned, his expression darkening. A simplistic view from someone educated in Boston, he said dismissively. What we seek to restore is state sovereignty, the right of Texans to govern Texas without federal interference or the corrupt influence of carpetbagger appointees. Through violence and assassination, Chelsea challenged. Through decisive action, Clifford corrected. The war between the states was lost because our leaders hesitated at critical moments, failing to strike with sufficient force when vulnerability existed. We won't make that mistake again. The cold calculation in his voice chilled Chelsea to her core. This was no hot-headed zealot, but a man who had methodically planned widespread bloodshed with the same precision he applied to his business affairs. And the innocent people who will die in your decisive action? She asked. Casualties occur in any significant historical transition, Clifford replied with chilling indifference. The future Confederate territory of Texas will honor their sacrifice once independence is secured. You're insane, Chelsea whispered, comprehending for the first time the full scope of his delusion. The federal government won't allow another rebellion. You'll bring the full force of the U.S. Army down on Texas. By the time federal forces can mobilize effectively, we will control all major transportation and communication lines throughout the state, Clifford explained with unsettling calm. Strategic targets have been identified, resources positioned, and loyal men placed in key positions. Within 72 hours of commencement, we will present the federal government with an accomplished fact they must either accept or spend years and countless lives attempting to reverse. He spoke with such conviction that Chelsea momentarily glimpsed the terrible possibility that his plan might succeed, at least long enough to throw Texas into bloody chaos. "And where do I fit into this vision of yours?" she asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Did you marry me simply to provide a respectable facade for your conspiracy?" "Initially, yes," Clifford admitted without remorse. "A refined, educated wife enhanced my standing with certain influential parties whose support was essential. Your background in telegraphy was an unexpected bonus. I had thought to utilize your knowledge of communications protocols once our plan was in motion." His expression hardened. "Instead, you chose to ally yourself with the son of a murderer against your lawful husband." "James Lee was no murderer," Chelsea countered. "You framed him for a crime you committed to gain control of his property." Clifford's eyebrows rose slightly. "Lee has been quite forthcoming with you, it seems. Did he also share his connection to the Pinkerton agency?" Chelsea's blood ran cold. If Clifford knew about Graham's Pinkerton affiliation, then his position was even more perilous than she had feared. "Your silence confirms it," Clifford said, interpreting her reaction correctly. Turner's men observed Lee hiding documents in that hollow oak, a practiced dead-drop technique. It was simply a matter of following the Pinkerton agent who collected them. "What have you done to him?" Chelsea demanded, unable to conceal her fear for Graham's safety. "Nothing." "Yet?" Clifford moved back behind his desk, a gesture of reasserted authority. "Lee's fate, like your own, depends on several factors, including your cooperation in the hours ahead." "My cooperation?" Chelsea repeated, buying time as she considered her options. "Indeed." Clifford opened a drawer and withdrew a sheet of paper. "This is a telegram drafted for your mother in redemption. It states that you are delighted to inform her that you and I will be visiting next week, and you look forward to seeing her and Emma." He pushed the paper across the desk. "You will encode this message personally and send it through the private telegraph line this afternoon." Chelsea stared at the seemingly innocent message, immediately understanding its true purpose. "A signal to your operatives in redemption." "Precisely," Clifford confirmed. "The message will activate our people there, who will proceed with securing the telegraph office and railway station. And if I refuse, then Turner will escort you to the cellar, where you will remain until our business is concluded." Clifford's voice chilled. "Meanwhile, your mother and sister will still receive visitors, though considerably less pleasant ones." The threat to her family struck Chelsea like a physical blow. "You would harm innocent women to ensure my compliance?" "I would prefer not to," Clifford replied, his tone suggesting this represented admirable restraint on his part. "Their safety depends entirely on your decisions in the next few minutes." Chelsea's mind raced desperately. The Pinkerton reinforcements wouldn't arrive until tomorrow. Too late to prevent the first phase of attacks if she sent the triggering message. Yet, refusal would endanger her mother and sister immediately, while depriving her of any chance to warn Graham or interfere with the conspiracy. And Graham? She asked. What happens to him? Lee will be dealt with appropriately once he has served his purpose, Clifford said with chilling finality. His knowledge of certain operations makes him temporarily valuable, but ultimately too dangerous to remain alive. You mean to kill him regardless of what I do? Chelsea concluded, her voice hollow. Eventually. The timing and manner depend partly on your cooperation. Clifford studied her face with clinical detachment. You've developed genuine feelings for him, haven't you? How disappointing. I credited you with better discernment. Chelsea lifted her chin, refusing to dignify his mockery with a response. And if I agree to send your message? What guarantee do I have that my family will remain safe? You have my word as a gentleman, Clifford replied. The absurdity of this assurance, from a man planning multiple murders and an armed rebellion, might have made Chelsea laugh in different circumstances. Instead, she regarded him steadily, weighing impossible alternatives. I need time to consider, she said finally. You have none, Clifford responded flatly. Your decision must be made now. Before Chelsea could reply, a sharp knock interrupted them. Jenkins opened the door without waiting for permission, his expression urgent. Riders approaching from the south road, sir, he reported. Not expected guests. Clifford's face tightened. How many? 8, maybe 10, moving fast. Clifford exchanged a significant glance with Turner. The Pinkertons have advanced their timeline, he concluded. Turning back to Chelsea, his expression hardened. It seems your Confederates have made your decision for you. He moved with unexpected swiftness, seizing Chelsea's arm with bruising force. Turner, secure the house and grounds. Implement emergency protocols immediately. The celebration is canceled. Inform our guests as they arrive. Jenkins, find Lee and bring him to the old storage shed. Ensure he's properly restrained. And Mrs. Wyman? Jenkins asked, his weathered face betraying nothing of his thoughts. Will be kept where she can cause no further interference, Clifford replied coldly. He dragged Chelsea from the study, his grip painful as he forced her down the hallway toward the service stairs. She struggled against his hold, but years of working with horses and cattle had given Clifford a strength she couldn't match. You won't succeed, she told him, breathless from her efforts to break free. The authorities will stop you. The authorities are hours away from here, Clifford countered, propelling her down the narrow staircase. By the time they organize any effective response, our first objectives will be secured. At the bottom of the stairs, he pushed her roughly toward the cellar door. Chelsea stumbled, catching herself against the wall. Clifford, please, she tried once more, appealing to whatever humanity might remain in him. This path leads only to more suffering and bloodshed. There's still time to stop this. His response was a backhanded blow that caught her across the cheek with stunning force, sending her sprawling onto the stone floor. Stars danced in Chelsea's vision as pain blossomed across her face. You forfeited any right to address me as a wife when you betrayed me with that stable hand, Clifford said, his voice colder than she had ever heard it. Your comfort or suffering now means nothing compared to the cause you've opposed. He hauled her to her feet and shoved her through the cellar door into darkness that smelled of earth and old wine. Chelsea stumbled down several steps before catching herself against a stack of crates. Consider your circumstances while I deal with your Pinkerton friends, Clifford said from the doorway. Perhaps a few hours in darkness will remind you of a wife's proper loyalty. The door slammed shut, followed by the decisive click of a key turning in the lock. Chelsea stood motionless in the gloom, her cheek throbbing as she listened to Clifford's footsteps retreating up the stairs. As her eyes adjusted to the minimal light filtering through small ground-level windows, Chelsea surveyed her prison. The cellar extended beneath the entire west wing of the house, a cavernous space divided by stone archways into several sections. Wine racks lined one wall, while barrels and crates of supplies occupied most of the remaining space. She moved to one of the small windows, standing on tiptoe to peer through the dusty glass. From this vantage point, she could see part of the main yard and the path leading to the stables. Men moved with purpose across the grounds, Turner's security team taking positions at strategic points around the house. In the distance, dust rose from the south road. The approaching riders, Jenkins had reported, a commotion near the stables drew her attention. 3 men were dragging a struggling figure toward the old storage shed. Graham fighting against his captors with desperate energy. Even as Chelsea watched in horror, one of the men struck him with the butt of a pistol, sending him to his knees. They hauled him upright and continued toward the shed, half dragging him between them. "Graham," Chelsea whispered, pressing her hands against the glass as if she could somehow reach through it to help him. Clifford appeared in the yard, issuing orders to Turner, who nodded and moved toward the house. From his gestures, Chelsea gathered that he was organizing defenses against the approaching riders. The Pinkerton reinforcements who had arrived a day earlier than expected, but still too late to prevent her capture. Or Graham's. As Turner departed, Clifford turned and walked purposefully toward the storage shed where Graham had been taken. The set of his shoulders and the deliberate pace of his stride sent a chill of foreboding through Chelsea's body. She pressed closer to the window, desperate for some way to warn Graham or signal the approaching Pinkertons. The glass was old and bubbled, set in crumbling mortar that had weathered decades of Texas seasons. Chelsea ran her fingers along the edge, feeling a slight give in one section. Working frantically, she dug at the deteriorating mortar with her fingernails, ignoring the pain as they broke against the unyielding stone. Tiny fragments came loose, but the window remained firmly in place. She looked around desperately for something to use as a tool, spotting a discarded bottle opener on a nearby shelf. With this makeshift implement, Chelsea attacked the mortar with renewed determination. More fragments crumbled away, and the window frame shifted slightly. She redoubled her efforts, working against time and the knowledge that with each passing minute, Clifford moved closer to implementing his deadly plans, beginning with Graham. Outside, the sounds of preparation for conflict grew louder. Men shouted orders, horses whinnied in distress, and in the distance, the thunder of approaching hooves grew steadily nearer. Chelsea worked without pause, driven by the certainty that if she couldn't escape this cellar, 2 men she cared for deeply, Graham and his Pinkerton colleague, would die, and Clifford's bloody conspiracy would launch unchallenged. The mortar around one side of the window finally gave way, allowing Chelsea to push the frame inward slightly. The opening wasn't large enough for escape, but it might allow her voice to carry to the approaching riders. If only she could attract their attention in time. Chelsea had nearly managed to loosen one side of the window frame when the sudden silence outside caught her attention. The frantic activity in the yard had ceased, replaced by an expectant hush that raised the hair on the back of her neck. She pressed her face to the opening she had created, straining to see what had caused this abrupt change. A small crowd had gathered near the storage shed. Ranch hands, house servants, and several early arriving guests for the canceled celebration. They formed a rough semicircle, their attention fixed on something Chelsea couldn't see from her limited vantage point. Clifford's voice, pitched to carry across the yard, broke the silence. "Bring him forward." 2 of Turner's men appeared, dragging Graham between them. Chelsea's heart contracted painfully at the sight of him. Blood streaked his face from a gash above his right eye, and he moved with the stiffness of a man who had endured a severe beating. Despite his injuries, he stood straight when the men released him, facing Clifford with unbroken dignity. "Many of you have known this man as Graham Lee, a competent stable hand who has worked at Wymain Ranch for the past 7 months, Clifford announced, addressing the assembled crowd. "What you didn't know is that his presence here has been a deception from the beginning." A murmur ran through the gathered workers. Clifford raised a hand for silence. "This man's real name is indeed Graham Leeson of James Lee, who once owned neighboring land until he was convicted of murdering my business partner 5 years ago." Clifford gestured toward Graham with theatrical precision. "The son has returned under false pretenses, intent on avenging his father through my own murder." The crowd's reaction was immediate. Shocked exclamations and hostile glances directed at Graham, who remained impassive despite the dangerous turn of events. "Tell's a lie," Chelsea whispered fiercely, though no one could hear her protest through the small opening. Clifford was twisting the truth with masterful skill, portraying himself as the intended victim rather than the conspirator. "Evidence found among his possessions confirms his murderous intentions," Clifford continued. holding up papers Chelsea recognized as the documents Graham had collected in the hollow oak. Maps of Wymain Ranch marking my daily routines. Notes detailing the household schedule. A pistol with my name carved into the bullet. This last claim was a blatant fabrication, a dramatic flourish designed to cement the crowd's hostility. Chelsea could see it working as the ranch hands' expressions hardened, while the house servants drew closer together in fearful groups. Furthermore, Clifford added, his voice dropping to a register that forced the crowd to lean forward attentively, Lee has been working with outside agitators. Pinkerton agents who even now approach our property with unknown intentions. The mention of Pinkertons elicited a fresh wave of muttering. In Texas, the detective agency's name carried complicated associations. For some, they represented law and order. For others, particularly those with Confederate sympathies, they symbolized unwelcome Northern interference. Graham finally spoke, his voice steady despite his injuries. Mr. Wymain is misrepresenting both my intentions and the Pinkertons' purpose. They come to prevent violence, not instigate it. Silence! Turner stepped forward, striking Graham across the face with an open hand. Clifford nodded approvingly at this display of force. Lee's silver tongue has already corrupted one member of this household, he announced. My wife, your mistress, has been led astray by his manipulation, feeding him information about our private affairs and undermining the security of Wymain Ranch. Chelsea's face burned with anger at this characterization of her choices. Even from a distance, she could see the calculation in Clifford's approach. By suggesting she had been corrupted rather than acting from her own conviction, he maintained his patriarchal authority while discrediting her judgment. Justice demands a swift response to such treachery, Clifford declared. At dawn tomorrow, before we celebrate Texas independence, this traitor will hang, a reminder that Wymain Ranch protects its own and punishes those who threaten our way of life. The pronouncement fell like a physical blow. Chelsea clutched the window frame, her knuckles whitening as she witnessed Clifford sentencing Graham to death without trial or legitimate authority. The gathered crowd shifted uncomfortably. Hanging a man, even one accused of plotting murder, exceeded the usual boundaries of ranch justice. Sensing their uncertainty, Clifford added, I've already dispatched riders to inform the county sheriff of these events. He has authorized this execution given the clear evidence and immediate threat. Another fabrication, Chelsea knew, but one that provided the veneer of legal sanction his audience needed. Until dawn, Lee will remain secured in the old tack room behind the stables, Clifford instructed. Turner, post 2 armed men to guard him at all times. The rest of you, return to your duties. The Independence Day celebration will proceed as planned. We will not allow one man's treachery to disrupt our commemoration of Texas liberty. As the crowd dispersed, Chelsea watched Graham being marched toward the stables, his steps determined, despite the rough handling of his guards. Just before disappearing from view, he turned his head slightly, his gaze sweeping across the house as if seeking her. Though she knew he couldn't possibly see her small window from that distance, Chelsea pressed her palm against the glass in a futile gesture of connection. When the yard emptied, leaving only Turner's men stationed at strategic points around the property, Chelsea slumped against the cellar wall, momentarily overwhelmed by the enormity of their situation. Graham would die at dawn unless she found a way to free him. The Pinkerton reinforcements had apparently been intercepted or delayed, and Clifford's conspiracy remained poised to launch, with telegraph operators and federal officials across Texas unknowingly marked for death. The weight of these realities might have crushed a woman of lesser determination, but Chelsea Boatwright Wymain had not survived her father's death, poverty, and her own interrupted dreams by surrendering to circumstance. Drawing a deep breath, she straightened her shoulders and surveyed the cellar with renewed purpose. The door at the top of the stairs was solid oak with an iron lock, impervious to any force she could apply. The window, even if she managed to remove it entirely, was too small for her to squeeze through. She needed another approach. Chelsea ran her hands through her hair, dislodging several of the pins Lucy had used to arrange it that morning. One pin, longer and stronger than the others, caught her attention. Emma had shown her how to use such implements years ago, during a mischievous phase when her younger sister had developed a talent for accessing locked spaces, a skill their mother had discouraged but that had provided hours of girlish entertainment. Moving to the cellar door, Chelsea examined the lock carefully. It was old-fashioned, but well-maintained, its keyhole large enough to manipulate with her improvised tool. She inserted the hairpin, feeling for the mechanism within as Emma had taught her. "Gentle pressure, steady hand," she murmured, recalling her sister's instructions. "Listen for the clicks." For several frustrating minutes, the lock resisted her efforts. Chelsea persisted, adjusting the angle of the pin, applying varying pressure, and focusing intently on the subtle feedback from the mechanism. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm her determination, she felt a distinct shift, then the satisfying click of the lock disengaging. Chelsea eased the door open, listening for any sound that might indicate guards posted outside. Hearing nothing, she slipped into the dimly lit service corridor. The household staff would be occupied with dismantling the celebration preparations or securing the main house against the anticipated Pinkerton approach. She had perhaps a small window of opportunity before her escape was discovered. Moving silently through the service passages, Chelsea made her way toward Clifford's study. If she could reach the telegraph equipment hidden in the outbuilding, she might be able to send warnings to the intended targets in Redemption and other towns. But first, she needed to know exactly when and where these attacks were planned. Information contained in the red ledger. The main floor was eerily quiet as she emerged from the service stairs. Through the front windows, Chelsea could see Turner organizing men into defensive positions around the property perimeter. Clifford was nowhere in sight, perhaps coordinating with his conspirators who had arrived for the celebration, now transformed into a military operation. The study door stood ajar, unusual for a room Clifford typically kept secured. Chelsea approached cautiously, listening for voices or movement within. Hearing nothing, she peered around the edge of the door. The room was empty, though signs of hasty activity were evident. Papers scattered across the desk, a partially emptied decanter of brandy, a drawer left open. Chelsea slipped inside, closing the door softly behind her. Her gaze went immediately to the chest where she had found the red ledger earlier. The bottom drawer hung open, its false bottom exposed and empty. Clifford had removed the incriminating document, likely to destroy it before any Pinkerton agents could secure it as evidence. Frustration threatened to overwhelm her, but Chelsea forced herself to think logically. Even without the ledger, she might still interfere with Clifford's plans. The fake telegraph setup in the bookcase held no real value, but it reminded her of the actual communication center in the outbuilding, now likely guarded and inaccessible. A new thought struck her. The telegraph office in Redemption had been identified as a primary target in the ledger. If she could somehow warn them. Chelsea's gaze fell on the telegram Clifford had drafted earlier, the innocuous-seeming message to her mother that would actually trigger the attacks. It remained on the desk where he had left it during their confrontation. Beside it lay several blank telegraph forms and a pencil. Decision made, Chelsea quickly drafted a new message, this one addressed to Ambrose Fuller, the Pinkerton contact in town whose name she had seen in Graham's notes. Wymany conspiracy confirmed, stop Graham Lee capture, execution, plan dawn stop attack, targeting telegraph offices, Redemption Austin, stop send reformants, immediately, stop Chelsea. Wymany. She folded the paper and tucked it into her bodice. Now she needed to find a way to send it, and quickly. The sound of approaching voices in the hallway sent Chelsea ducking behind the heavy curtains flanking the study window. Two men entered, Turnell and Colonel Barnett, deep in conversation. "Wymain says we proceed with modifications to the original timeline," Turnell was saying. "The first phase begins at midnight rather than dawn." "The Pinkertons complicate matters," Barnett replied, his southern accent more pronounced under stress, "if they've alerted federal authorities." "They haven't," Turner interrupted confidently. "We intercepted their lead rider 2 miles south. The rest have pulled back to regroup, which gives us the time we need." Chelsea pressed herself deeper into the curtain's folds, barely daring to breathe as the men moved further into the room. "And Mrs. Wymain?" Barnett asked. "Her escape from the cellar suggests we have vulnerabilities." Chelsea froze. They knew she was free? Which meant a household-wide search was likely already underway. "Being handled," Turner replied tersely. "The house is being secured room by room. She can't have gone far." "Find her quickly," Barnett advised. A woman with telegraph skills and knowledge of our plans represents a significant threat if she reaches any working communications equipment. The men moved toward the desk, gathering papers Chelsea couldn't see from her hiding place. After several tense minutes, they departed, leaving the door open behind them, likely to facilitate the search Turner had mentioned. Chelsea remained motionless for several minutes, ensuring they were truly gone before emerging from her hiding place. The conversation had confirmed her worst fears. The attacks were accelerating, beginning at midnight rather than dawn. Graham's execution remained scheduled for morning, but that would be too late to stop the violence already in motion. With the house being searched systematically, her options were severely limited. Chelsea moved to the window, peering out at the rapidly darkening grounds. Twilight was falling, bringing with it increased activity as Turner's men lit lanterns and established their defensive perimeter. Near the stables, something caught her attention: a wagon being loaded with large wooden crates. She recognized them from previous celebrations at Wyoming Ranch, fireworks purchased from San Antonio for special occasions. Despite canceling the formal celebration, Clifford apparently intended to maintain this element, perhaps as a signal to co-conspirators across the region that operations were proceeding. The fireworks sparked an idea in Chelsea's mind: a diversion, something to draw attention away from the stables where Graham was held, might create the opportunity they needed. But first, she had to find a way to send her warning to the Pinkertons. Chelsea's gaze shifted to the gun cabinet across the room. Clifford kept several rifles there, along with ammunition and hunting equipment. If she were to attempt a rescue, she would need protection and leverage. Moving silently to the cabinet, she was relieved to find it unlocked. Clifford's confidence in his security measures working in her favor for once. She selected a Winchester repeating rifle, checking that it was loaded before slinging it across her back using its leather strap. A box of additional cartridges went into her pocket. Now armed, Chelsea faced her next challenge: reaching the outbuilding with its telegraph equipment. From her observations, she knew it lay approximately a quarter-mile from the main house, near the eastern boundary. With Turner's men patrolling the grounds, a direct approach would be suicide. The service tunnel she had used earlier might offer a partial solution. It emerged near the kitchen gardens, still a considerable distance from the outbuilding, but closer than her current position and less heavily guarded than the main exits. Decision made, Chelsea slipped from the study and made her way back to the service stairs. The house remained eerily quiet, though distant voices suggested the search for her continued in other wings. She descended quickly, retracing her steps through the cellar and locating the narrow tunnel that servants had once used to transport supplies during inclement weather. The passage was dark and musty, requiring Chelsea to feel her way along the damp stone walls. Cobwebs brushed her face, and twice she froze at the sound of scurrying rodents. After what seemed an eternity but was likely only minutes, she reached the tunnel's end. A small door, opening into a storage shed at the edge of the kitchen gardens. Chelsea pressed her ear against the weathered wood, listening for any sound that might indicate guards posted outside. Hearing nothing, she eased the door open a crack, peering into the gathering darkness. The kitchen gardens lay empty, though lanterns bobbed in the distance where Turner's men patrolled the main house perimeter. To reach the outbuilding, she would need to cross approximately 200 yards of open ground, then navigate another 100 yards through a stand of oak trees. In daylight, such a journey would be impossible without detection. In the deepening twilight, with attention focused on the house and anticipated Pinkerton approach from the south, she might have a chance. Chelsea eased out of the shed, staying low and close to the garden's dense plantings. The weight of the Winchester across her back was unfamiliar, but oddly reassuring. She had never fired a gun in anger, but had learned basic shooting from her father years ago, knowledge that might prove crucial in the hours ahead. Moving methodically from shadow to shadow, Chelsea worked her way east toward the tree line. Twice she froze as patrolling guards passed nearby, their attention directed outward rather than toward the presumed secure inner grounds. When she finally reached the shelter of the oaks, Chelsea paused to catch her breath and reassess her situation. The outbuilding was now visible approximately 100 yards away, a simple wooden structure with a single door and high window. A guard stood outside, rifle resting casually against his shoulder as he smoked and gazed toward the main house. Chelsea's original plan had been to access the telegraph equipment, send her warning, then attempt Graham's rescue. But the presence of the guard complicated matters. Even if she managed to neutralize him somehow, the commotion might alert others before she could complete the transmission. She needed another approach, something that would create sufficient distraction to occupy Turner's men while she freed Graham and secured their escape. The fireworks being unloaded near the stables offered that possibility, but timing would be critical. As Chelsea considered her options, movement near the stables caught her attention. Clifford emerged from the tack room, speaking with Jenkins. Though she couldn't hear their words at this distance, their gestures suggested an argument. Jenkins shaking his head, while Clifford's stance grew increasingly rigid with anger. The exchange ended with Jenkins walking away stiffly, while Clifford remained by the tack room door, issuing instructions to the guards posted there. After several minutes, he departed toward the main house, his stride purposeful. Chelsea waited until Clifford disappeared from view before changing her direction, abandoning her approach to the outbuilding in favor of circling toward the stables. The telegraph warning would have to wait. Graham's situation appeared to be deteriorating more rapidly than she had anticipated. Using the natural cover provided by trees and outbuildings, Chelsea worked her way toward the rear of the stables. Activity concentrated at the front where the fireworks were being prepared, leaving the back relatively unguarded. She reached the small rear door as full darkness descended, the new moon providing perfect cover for her movements. Inside, the familiar smells of hay and horses greeted her. Most of the stalls stood empty, the animals having been relocated to the corral during the day's commotion. Chelsea moved silently through the shadowy interior, orienting herself toward the tack room where Graham was being held. Voices from the front of the stables kept her pressed against the wall, listening intently. "Want it done before midnight," a man was saying, one of Turner's security team, judging by the harsh accent. "Says there's no point waiting for dawn with the Pinkertons already moving in. Seems a waste," another voice replied. This one belonging to Dawson, one of the regular ranch hands. Lee was good with the horses. Hard to believe he was planning to murder the boss all along. "Believe it," the first man stated flatly. "Found maps and notes in his quarters. Had every one of Mr. Wymane's movements marked out." "Still," Dawson persisted, "hanging's a dirty business. Better to let the law handle it proper." "This is Texas justice," came the reply. "Wymane's within his rights, protecting his property and life." Their footsteps moved away, heading toward the front, where preparations for the evening continued. Chelsea remained motionless, processing what she had overheard. Clifford had accelerated everything. The attacks beginning at midnight, and now Graham's execution moved up to precede them. Time was running dangerously short. Chelsea moved toward the tack room at the far end of the stables, the Winchester now gripped firmly in her hands rather than slung across her back. 2 guards stood outside the door, one alert and watchful, the other leaning against the wall with the casual posture of a man not expecting trouble. Direct confrontation would be suicide. She needed distraction and opportunity. Near the front of the stables, men continued unloading the fireworks, stacking them for the display planned later that evening. An idea formed in Chelsea's mind. Dangerous and desperate, but possibly their only chance. She retreated silently, making her way to the hayloft ladder and climbing carefully to avoid any noise that might betray her presence. From this elevated position, she could see over the stall partitions to where the fireworks had been temporarily stored. Large crates containing rockets, Roman candles, and other pyrotechnics imported from China at considerable expense. More importantly, she could see the guards standing outside the tack room door, their attention directed outward rather than up. Chelsea positioned herself near the edge of the loft, the Winchester ready. Below, the tack room door was secured with a heavy padlock, impossible to open without the key one of the guards surely carried. Direct assault remained impractical, but creating circumstances that would force them to move Graham might work. The sound of hooves on packed earth drew her attention to the yard outside. Clifford had returned, accompanied by Turner and 2 other men Chelsea recognized as guests who had arrived for the celebration, both former Confederate officers now serving in the Texas legislature. "Everything prepared?" Clifford asked as he dismounted. "Yes, sir," the more attentive guard replied. "Whenever you're ready." "Good." The colonel feels we should proceed immediately rather than waiting. Our other operations are commencing, and this loose end should be tied off. Clifford gestured toward the tack room door. Bring him out. This was happening too quickly before Chelsea had finalized any plan of action. She raised the Winchester, then hesitated. Shooting Clifford would likely result in immediate retaliation against Graham, while potentially provoking a firefight she couldn't possibly win alone. Below, the guard unlocked the padlock, swinging the tack room door open. On your feet, Lee, he ordered. Boss wants a word before you dance on air. Graham emerged, his hands bound before him with rope, dried blood still visible on his face from earlier mistreatment. Despite his predicament, he stood straight, his expression defiant as he faced Clifford. I offered you mercy once, Clifford said, his voice carrying clearly in the evening stillness. A chance to admit your schemes and identify your Pinkerton collaborators. That offer has expired. The only schemer here is you, Wymain, Graham replied steadily. Your conspiracy won't succeed. Too many people know the truth now. Clifford's laugh held no humor. Your Pinkerton friends are in retreat, your evidence is destroyed, and your confederate in my household is being hunted down as we speak. Who exactly remains to oppose me? Graham's eyes flicked upward, so briefly Chelsea thought she might have imagined it. But the slight shift in his posture suggested he had somehow sensed her presence in the loft above. Justice has a way of finding men like you eventually, Graham said, his voice pitched slightly louder than necessary. Even if I don't live to see it. The exchange gave Chelsea the precious moments she needed to finalize her desperate plan. The fireworks, the hay, the distraction they could create all came together in her mind with crystal clarity. Remaining flat against the loft floor to avoid detection, Chelsea inched backward to where bales of hay were stacked against the rear wall. Nearby sat a lantern, unlit but filled with oil, left by a stable hand earlier in the day. She struck a match from the small box sitting beside the lantern, her hand steady despite the enormity of what she was about to attempt. Rather than lighting the lantern, she touched the flame to the corner of a hay bale, which caught immediately. Moving quickly back to her position, overlooking the confrontation below, Chelsea waited until the fire spread, creating a bright glow that would soon be visible to those in the stable yard. Outside, Clifford was still speaking, apparently enjoying his moment of triumph over his captive. Before you die, Lee, I want you to understand something. Your father died believing his son had abandoned him. His last words, according to the prison warden, were asking why you never visited. Graham's face tightened with pain at this calculated cruelty. Another lie to add to your collection, Wymain. My father knew I was working to clear his name. Believe what comforts you, Clifford replied dismissively. Turner, prepare the rope. We'll use the oak beside the corral. Poetic justice, considering how fond Lee was of that hollow tree for his spy activities. The growing light from the spreading fire finally caught Turner's attention. He looked up, his expression changing from complacency to alarm. Fire, the hayloft's burning. The reaction was immediate, men shouting, horses in the corral whinnying nervously as they smelled smoke. Clifford spun toward the stable, his face transforming with rage as he spotted Chelsea in the loft opening, rifle in hand. Get Lee secured, he shouted to the guards. Don't let him escape during this distraction. Chelsea raised the Winchester, aiming not at any person but at the crates of fireworks now visible through the stable door. She squeezed the trigger, the rifle's report momentarily drowning out the growing commotion. Her aim was true. The bullet struck something metal among the fireworks, perhaps a container or supporting bracket. A shower of sparks erupted, followed immediately by a piercing whistle as the first rocket ignited. What followed was chaos incarnate. Fireworks exploded in rapid succession, rockets screaming into the night sky, Roman candles shooting colored balls of fire in all directions, spinning wheels throwing sparks across the stable yard, men scattered, diving for cover as pyrotechnics discharged randomly around them. In the confusion, Chelsea saw Graham drive his shoulder into the nearest guard, sending the man sprawling despite his bound hands. The second guard raised his pistol, but a wild Catherine wheel spun directly into his path, causing him to stumble backward. Chelsea descended the ladder rapidly, the Winchester clutched in one hand. The fire above was spreading, but slowly enough to give her time to reach Graham before the entire structure became engulfed. Graham! she called, racing toward him as he struggled with his bonds. He looked up, relief washing over his face at the sight of her. Chelsea, how did you— No time, she interrupted, pulling a small knife from her pocket, another item borrowed from Clifford's study. She sliced through the ropes binding his wrists, then pressed the knife into his hand. We need to move now. Clifford's accelerated everything. The attacks begin at midnight. Understanding dawned in Graham's eyes. The Pinkertons were intercepted, Chelsea confirmed grimly. We're on our own. Around them, the chaos continued. The stable roof had caught fire now, sending billowing smoke into the night sky. Fireworks continued to discharge randomly, keeping Clifford's men disorganized and defensive rather than pursuing them. Graham surveyed the scene quickly, making a decision. The horses in the corral, if we can reach them. Chelsea nodded her agreement. Go, I'll cover you. As Graham sprinted toward the corral, Chelsea raised the Winchester, not to fire, but to present a visible threat that kept Turner's men at bay. Through the smoke and confusion, she caught glimpses of Clifford, shouting orders that went unheeded in the pandemonium. Graham reached the corral fence, vaulting over it with an agility that belied his earlier mistreatment. Chelsea backed toward him, maintaining her defensive posture with the rifle as she navigated around still exploding fireworks. Chelsea, Graham called, having caught 2 horses, Athena and his own mount, a sturdy bay gelding. Now! She turned and ran the final distance to the corral, Graham's outstretched hand meeting hers as she reached the fence. With his help, she scrambled over, then mounted Athena in a fluid motion born of practice. Which way? She asked, gathering the reins as the mare danced nervously beneath her. Graham swung onto his own horse, pointing east. The hollow oak. We can reach the main road from there, maybe intercept the Pinkertons regrouping to the south. A rifle shot cracked nearby, the bullet splintering wood inches from Chelsea's head. Turner had organized several men through the chaos, creating a firing line aimed at the corral. Ride! Graham shouted, kicking his mount into motion. Chelsea followed, bent low over Athena's neck as more shots rang out behind them. The horses, panicked by the fire and gunfire, needed little encouragement to run at full speed away from the commotion. They raced across the darkened pasture, the burning stable illuminating their escape like a macabre beacon. Chelsea risked a glance backward, seeing mounted pursuers already forming up to follow, Clifford at their head, his face visible even at this distance as a mask of pure fury. They're coming, she called to Graham, who rode slightly ahead. Just reach the tree line, he shouted back. We have a small advantage in the dark. The distance closed agonizingly slowly, each hoofbeat seeming to take forever as the open ground stretched before them. Chelsea urged Athena to greater speed, the mare responding gallantly despite her fear. Just as they reached the protective shadows of the oak grove, Chelsea heard a sound that chilled her blood, the distinctive whistle of an approaching train, right on schedule heading toward the Redemption Junction that was among the first targets in Clifford's deadly plan. The conspiracy was already in motion, unfolding across Texas while they fled for their lives. Even if they escaped their immediate pursuers, stopping what Clifford had set in motion would require nothing short of a miracle. Chapter 7. Justice and Redemption. The oak grove swallowed them into darkness, providing momentary shelter from their pursuers. Chelsea pulled Athena to a halt beside a massive tree, listening to the sounds of Clifford's men spreading out behind them. We can't outrun them, she said, her breath coming in quick gasps. They know this land too well. Graham nodded grimly, his face ghostly in the faint light filtering through the branches. We need to separate, divide their attention. No, Chelsea said fiercely, we stay together. Chelsea, I won't lose you again, she interrupted. Not after everything we've risked. Their eyes met in the darkness, volumes of unspoken feeling passing between them. Finally, Graham nodded. Then we need a different advantage. Something they won't expect. Chelsea's mind raced, evaluating and discarding possibilities. The tack room where they held you? Is it the one with the connecting door to the hay storage? Yes. Why? Most of Clifford's men are behind us, she said, the outline of a plan forming rapidly. But the stables are still burning, creating confusion. If we circle back... It's too dangerous, Graham protested. We'd be riding straight back into their hands. Not if we use the old creek bed, Chelsea countered. It runs behind the oak grove and curves back toward the eastern paddock. We could approach from the blind side while their attention is focused here. Graham hesitated, clearly weighing the risks. What would that accomplish? We'd still be trapped on Wymain property with armed men hunting us. The telegraph equipment in the outbuilding, Chelsea explained. If we can reach it, send warnings to the towns Clifford is targeting. We'd need time we don't have, Graham said, frustration evident in his voice. And the outbuilding will be guarded. A shout from behind them indicated their pursuers were closing in. Decision time had run out. The creek bed, Chelsea said with finality, turning Athena toward the narrow depression that had once carried water before drought redirected its flow. Now, Graham. He followed without further argument, both horses picking their way carefully along the dry creek bed, their hooves muffled by the soft sand. The natural trench provided concealment as they paralleled the main property for several hundred yards before curving back toward the outbuildings. They dismounted in a copse of scrub mesquite near the eastern paddock, securing the horses where they could run if needed. The stables still burned in the distance, orange flames licking skyward, but the fireworks had exhausted themselves, leaving an eerie quiet punctuated by shouted orders as men searched the eastern boundary. Most of them are still looking where we disappeared, Graham observed. But that won't last long. Clifford knows these grounds too well. Chelsea surveyed what they could see of the ranch complex. The main house stood dark except for lanterns moving within service, securing the property in preparation for whatever story Clifford would spin to explain the night's chaos. Near the still-burning stables, several figures moved purposefully, organizing what appeared to be a secondary search pattern, her attention fixed on a smaller structure set apart from the other buildings. The hay storage, attached to the tack room where Graham had been held. 2 guards stood outside, their figures silhouetted against the distant flames. "I recognize Jenkins," Chelsea whispered, indicating the taller of the 2 men. "The other is one of Turner's security team." "Jenkins has always struck me as the most decent of Wymane's foremen," Graham said thoughtfully. "The others follow orders without question, but Jenkins sometimes shows independent judgment." "He was a Union soldier," Chelsea added, remembering fragments of conversation overheard during her months at the ranch. "Took the job with Clifford out of necessity after the war, not loyalty to the cause." Graham's expression sharpened with interest. That could be significant. If he fought for the Union, he might not support Clifford's Confederate conspiracy, Chelsea finished. "It's a chance worth taking." They crept closer, using the shadows and outbuildings for cover. As they neared the hay storage, Chelsea gestured toward a small side door, barely visible in the darkness. "That connects to the main storage area. If we can create a distraction, draw 1 guard away." Graham nodded, understanding her intent. He picked up a stone and tossed it against the metal roof of a nearby shed, creating a sharp clatter that echoed in the night. The reaction was immediate. Both guards tensed, rifles raised. "Check it out," Jenkins ordered his companion. "I'll maintain position here." The second guard moved cautiously toward the sound, leaving Jenkins alone, watching the main entrance to the tack room. "Stay here," Chelsea whispered. "I'll approach him alone." "Chelsea, no. He'll be less threatened by me," she insisted. "And you're still injured." Before Graham could protest further, Chelsea slipped away, circling to approach Jenkins from an angle where the remaining guard wouldn't immediately spot her. She emerged from the shadows deliberately, keeping her hands visible. "Jenkins?" she called softly. He spun, rifle instantly trained on her. Recognition flashed across his weathered face, followed by conflict. "Mrs. Wymane," he acknowledged, not lowering his weapon, "you shouldn't be here." "I know what Clifford is planning," she said, maintaining her calm despite the rifle pointed at her chest. "The coordinated attacks on telegraph offices, the assassinations of federal officials, the attempt to restart the war." Jenkins's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes. "That's a serious accusation against your husband, ma'am." "We both know it's true," Chelsea replied, taking a careful step closer. "You fought for the Union, Jenkins. You wore blue, not gray. Does Clifford know?" The question struck home. His jaw tightened. "My service record is my own business." "Not anymore," Chelsea said, her voice gentle but firm. "Not when Clifford plans to plunge Texas back into bloodshed in the name of a cause you fought against." Jenkins's rifle wavered slightly. "What Wymane does with his political associates ain't my concern. I'm paid to manage this ranch, nothing more." "Is that what you tell yourself?" Chelsea pressed, taking another step. "That the meetings, the shipments, the maps marked with attack targets, those are just politics?" Uncertainty crept into Jenkins's stance. What exactly are you saying, Mrs. Wymain? I'm saying innocent people will die tonight. Telegraph operators, railway workers, federal marshals. Unless someone stops Clifford's conspiracy. She met his gaze directly. Men like you, Jenkins. Men who fought to preserve the Union only to watch it threatened again by those who can't accept defeat. The rifle lowered incrementally. Even if what you're saying is true, what could I do about it? Help us, Chelsea said simply. Graham Lee isn't the murderer Clifford claims. He's gathering evidence for the Pinkerton Detective Agency to prevent violence and protect innocent lives. Pinkertons? Jenkins repeated, surprise evident in his voice. Federal agents investigating the conspiracy, Chelsea confirmed. Help us reach them, Jenkins. Help us stop this before more blood is shed. Long seconds ticked by as the foreman struggled with his conscience. In the distance, shouts indicated the second guard had found nothing and was returning. Jenkins, Chelsea said urgently, what kind of man do you want to be remembered as? The one who stood by while innocent people died, or the one who had the courage to stop it? Decision crystallized in his face. Jenkins lowered his rifle completely. Where's Lee? He asked tersely. Here, Graham said, emerging from the shadows where he had crept closer during the exchange. Jenkins nodded once, his mind apparently made up. The other guard returns in moments. I can create a distraction, but you'll need to move fast. He gestured toward the tack room. Take 2 horses from the back paddock, less likely to be missed in the confusion. Head east toward your family's old property, Lee. It's the last place Wymain will expect you to go. Graham's eyebrows rose in surprise. The Lee homestead still stands? Abandoned, but intact, Jenkins confirmed. Wymain keeps it as a reminder of his victory over your father. His expression hardened. Always struck me as wrong, the way that case was handled. The returning guard's footsteps became audible, approaching from around the corner of the building. Go, Jenkins said urgently. I'll handle this. Graham caught his arm briefly. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, the foreman replied grimly. We're all likely to hang before morning. As Graham and Chelsea slipped toward the back paddock, they heard Jenkins greet his returning companion with manufactured urgency. Movement at the south fence line. Looks like our runners. Get the others. I'll maintain position here. The ruse worked. The second guard hurried away, leaving Jenkins alone long enough to saddle 2 fresh horses from the paddock. Strong animals, less exhausted than Athena and Graham's mount. By the time Chelsea and Graham led them from the small rear gate, shouts from the direction of the main house indicated their deception had been discovered. Clifford knows, Chelsea said, swinging into the saddle with practiced ease despite her torn and dirty skirts. Then we ride hard, Graham replied, mounting his own horse, east to the old homestead. Jenkins appeared suddenly beside them, his own horse saddled and ready. You'll need an extra gun, he said by way of explanation. I know shortcuts Wymain's men won't expect us to use. The 3 riders plunged into the darkness, leaving the burning stables and searching men behind. Jenkins led them along neglected trails overgrown with mesquite and cactus, paths that hadn't seen regular use since the Lee property changed hands 5 years earlier. They rode in silence, pushing the horses as fast as the difficult terrain would allow. Behind them, lanterns bobbed in the distance as Clifford organized a more systematic pursuit. The advantage of Jenkins's knowledge might buy them minutes, perhaps an hour at most. The terrain changed as they crossed onto what had once been Lee land. The carefully maintained pastures of Wymain Ranch gave way to fields gone partially wild, nature reclaiming what man had briefly tamed. In the darkness, Chelsea could make out the skeletal forms of fence posts, many fallen or leaning at precarious angles. There, Graham said suddenly, his voice tight with emotion. Against the star-filled sky, a 2-story structure took shape. The Lee family home. Dark and silent in the night. Even in abandonment, the house maintained a certain dignity, its limestone walls sturdy despite years of neglect. Clifford never used it? Chelsea asked as they approached. Considered it beneath him, Jenkins explained. Said he'd build something grander eventually. Meanwhile, it stood empty except for occasional use as a line shack by hands working this section. They dismounted in what had once been a front yard, now overgrown with prairie grass and wildflowers. Graham stood motionless for a moment, absorbing the sight of his childhood home after years of exile. Strange, he said quietly. I never thought I'd return like this. No time for reminiscing, Jenkins warned, leading the horses toward a small barn that had survived better than the main house. They'll be here within the hour. Inside the house, time had left its mark in layers of dust and cobwebs, but the structure remained sound. Furniture stood draped in sheets, looking like pale ghosts in the darkness. Graham moved through the rooms with the certainty of memory, despite the years away. My father's study, he said, leading them to a room at the rear of the house. It has the best defensive position, windows on 3 sides with clear views of the approach. Chelsea watched as Graham ran his hand along a bookshelf, finding a concealed lever that caused a panel to swing outward. Behind it lay a small compartment containing several rifles and boxes of ammunition. My father believed in preparedness, Graham explained, distributing the weapons. Texas can be a dangerous place, especially for a man who stands on principle. Jenkins examined one of the rifles with approval. Winchester 66, good choice. He moved to the windows, assessing sightlines and potential cover. This position is defensible, but we're still outnumbered 20-1. We don't need to win, Chelsea reminded him. Just hold out until the Pinkertons arrive. If they arrive, Jenkins cautioned. Wymain was confident they'd been intercepted. Graham shook his head. Pinkerton agents are persistent. If their lead rider was captured, the others would regroup, find another approach. Then our job is to survive until they do, Chelsea said with determination. She moved to the study desk, brushing away years of dust to reveal a polished surface. What's this? Graham looked where she indicated. A brass plate set into the wood with connections for wires leading to the wall. My father's telegraph, he said wonderingly. I'd forgotten. A private telegraph line? Chelsea asked, excitement building in her voice. Connected to the main line that runs parallel to the railway, about half a mile south, Graham confirmed. My father installed it for his engineering work with the railroad. Chelsea's mind raced with possibilities. Does it still work? The equipment is here, Graham said, opening another concealed panel that revealed a telegraph key and sounder. But the connection to the main line was cut when Wymain took over the property. Could it be repaired? Chelsea asked urgently. Jenkins moved to examine the setup. The interior wiring looks intact if the line itself hasn't been removed. We'd need to follow it to where it connects to the main telegraph line, Graham said. Splice it back if it's been cut. I can do that, Jenkins offered. Maintain telegraph lines for the Union Army during the war. Hope flared in Chelsea's chest. If we can reconnect to the main line, I could send warnings to all the telegraph offices targeted in Clifford's plan. Graham looked from the telegraph equipment to Jenkins, then back to Chelsea. It's worth trying, but one of us needs to stay here, prepare defenses before Clifford arrives. I'll go, Jenkins decided. I know where the lines are likely cut, at the property boundary. Lee, you're still injured, and Mrs. Wymain needs to be ready to send those messages if I succeed. Decision made. Jenkins gathered what supplies he could find, wire, tools from a cabinet in the study, a small lantern. Give me 30 minutes, he said, if I haven't returned by then. We'll hold as long as we can, Graham promised. After Jenkins departed, Graham and Chelsea worked quickly to fortify the house. They barricaded the front door with furniture, positioned rifles at strategic windows, and filled containers with water from the old kitchen pump that still functioned. Through it all, Chelsea was acutely aware of Graham moving through his childhood home, touching objects, pausing occasionally before family portraits still hanging on walls, rediscovering pieces of himself in this place he had been forced to abandon. Your father built this house, she said softly as they worked. Graham nodded, his hands running along a hand-carved banister. Every detail was his design. He believed in creating something that would last generations. A sad smile touched his lips. He didn't anticipate Clifford Wymain. We'll clear his name, Chelsea promised. When this is over, if we survive, Graham corrected gently. Chelsea reached for his hand, twining her fingers with his. We will. Their eyes met in the dim light of the lantern they had found. Despite the danger surrounding them, despite the odds against their survival, something powerful and undeniable arced between them, a connection that transcended their desperate circumstances. Graham drew her closer, his free hand lifting to trace the curve of her cheek. "Chelsea," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "If we don't—" "Don't say it," she interrupted. "Don't treat this moment like a goodbye." Instead of arguing, he lowered his mouth to hers in a kiss that contained all the words left unspoken. Tenderness and passion, fear and hope, promises for a future neither was certain they would live to see. When they finally separated, breathless and momentarily forgetful of the danger approaching, Graham rested his forehead against hers. "Whatever happens," he whispered, "know that meeting you gave meaning to everything I've endured these past 5 years." Before Chelsea could respond, a sound from outside snapped them back to present reality. Hoofbeats, multiple riders approaching from the west. "They're here," Graham said, moving quickly to the window. In the moonlight, he could make out a line of riders cresting the rise toward the house. Sooner than expected, Chelsea joined him, counting the approaching figures. "At least 15 men. Clifford leads them." They moved with practiced efficiency to their defensive positions, Graham at the front window with the clearest line of fire, Chelsea at the side window where she could cover the approach to the barn. "No sign of Jenkins," Graham observed grimly. "He may have been captured. Or he's still working on the telegraph line," Chelsea countered, refusing to abandon hope. "We need to buy him more time." The riders halted at a careful distance from the house, just beyond effective rifle range. Clifford's voice carried clearly in the night air. "I know you're in there, Lee. You and my treacherous wife." His tone vibrated with barely controlled rage. "Come out now, and I might be persuaded to show mercy." Graham and Chelsea exchanged glances, both recognizing the empty promise for what it was. "Your conspiracy has been exposed, Wymain," Graham called back. "The Pinkertons are on their way with federal marshals. Surrender now, and you might avoid the hangman's noose." A harsh laugh answered him. "Always the idealist. The Pinkertons have been dealt with. No help is coming." Clifford's voice hardened. "I'll give you 1 minute to send out my wife. After that, we burn the house around you." "He's bluffing," Chelsea whispered. "The house is stone. It won't burn easily." "The roof and interior will," Graham replied grimly. "An old tactic from the war." Decision crystallized in Chelsea's eyes. "Then we need to show him we're not alone, that witnesses exist to whatever happens here." Graham caught her meaning immediately. "Make it public. Remove his advantage of secrecy." Chelsea moved to the desk where extra ammunition was stored. Among the boxes lay a flare gun, a signaling device Graham's father had used during his railroad work. "Perfect," she murmured, checking that it was loaded. "What are you planning?" Graham asked. "Creating an audience," Chelsea replied, moving to the window facing east, away from Clifford's position. "The Independence Day celebration guests will be arriving from Austin and San Antonio. The main road is just beyond that rise." Understanding dawned in Graham's expression. "If they see the flare, curiosity will bring them here," Chelsea confirmed. "Clifford can't massacre us in front of Texas state legislators and prominent citizens without revealing his true nature." "It's a gamble," Graham warned. "If they're already part of his conspiracy—" "Not all of them," Chelsea insisted. "Some were invited purely for appearance's sake, and at least one, Judge Hamilton's cousin from Austin, is a federal marshal. I overheard Clifford telling Turner to keep him away from certain guests." The minute Clifford had granted was nearly expired. Outside, his men were spreading out, surrounding the house in preparation for assault. "Do it," Graham decided. Chelsea aimed the flare gun through the open window and fired. A brilliant red streak shot skyward, bursting in a shower of crimson sparks high above the Lee homestead. The light illuminated the landscape for hundreds of yards in all directions, revealing Clifford's men frozen in surprise at the unexpected signal. "What have you done?" Clifford shouted, fury evident in his voice. "Invited witnesses to your treachery," Graham called back. "How will you explain attacking a private residence to the dignitaries arriving for your celebration?" A commotion at the rear of Clifford's group suggested the ploy had worked faster than anticipated. Lanterns appeared on the road beyond the eastern rise. Carriages and riders approaching, drawn by the unusual sight of the flare. "Sir," they heard Turner's urgent voice addressing Clifford, "the Austin contingent is approaching. Judge Hamilton's party is with them." Clifford's curse was audible even at this distance. "Hold positions," he ordered his men, "but maintain the encirclement. No one leaves that house alive." The standoff had begun. Inside the Lee homestead, Graham and Chelsea maintained their vigilance at the windows, watching as the situation outside grew increasingly complex. The first carriages from Austin had arrived, their occupants demanding explanations from a visibly frustrated Clifford. "He's spinning some tale about dangerous fugitives," Graham observed, watching the animated conversation. "But several of those men don't appear convinced." A movement at the rear of the house caught Chelsea's attention. "Someone's approaching from the south," she whispered urgently. Graham shifted position to cover the potential threat, rifle raised. The back door opened slowly, revealing Jenkins, his clothing torn and dirty, but his expression triumphant. "It's done," he announced without preamble. Lines reconnected to the main telegraph. Had to splice it in 3 places where Wymaney's men had cut it, but the connection's solid. Chelsea moved immediately to the telegraph key at James Lee's desk. "Are you certain it works?" "Tested it myself," Jenkins confirmed. "Sent a simple test signal and got acknowledgement from the Austin Junction." Hope surged through Chelsea as she sat at the desk, fingers hovering over the familiar brass key. 5 years might have passed since she'd last operated a telegraph, but her hands remembered the rhythms, the precise pressure needed to form clear signals. "What will you send?" Graham asked, maintaining his position at the window, while Jenkins took up a defensive stance at another. "Warnings to every office on Clifford's target list," Chelsea replied, already composing the message in her mind. Then a direct appeal to the federal marshal, who's arrived with the Austin party. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, the key clicking out a rapid series of dots and dashes. The sounder beside it confirmed that her signals were transmitting, carrying her urgent warnings across miles of copper wire to telegraph operators in Redemption, Austin, San Antonio, and beyond. Message: priority urgent. Stop operator Wymaney Ranch. Stop armed attack planned your location tonight. Stop secure premises immediately. Stop federal authorities notified. Stop. She repeated the warning for each location listed in Clifford's ledger, her concentration absolute despite the tension mounting outside. When the immediate warnings were sent, she composed a more detailed message to the Pinkerton office in Austin, providing their location and the situation at the Lee homestead. Outside, the standoff had grown more complex. Additional carriages continued to arrive, drawn by the unusual activity and reports of the flare seen from miles away. What had begun as Clifford's private vendetta was rapidly becoming a public spectacle, with prominent citizens demanding explanations. "Wyman's losing control of the narrative," Jenkins reported from his window. "Several men are openly questioning his story about dangerous fugitives." "Can you identify the federal marshal?" Chelsea asked urgently. Jenkins studied the crowd for a moment. Tall man with a silver beard, standing apart from Hamilton's group, wearing a dark coat despite the heat. Felsie nodded and turned back to the telegraph key, sending one final message. "To federal marshal observing a woman named Ranch standoff. Stop evidence of treason and conspiracy inside Lee homestead. Stop Clifford Wyman planning coordinated attacks on federal installations. Stop Pinkertons have doctor notices signs in Australia. Stop. Why in the hell would?" People clicked on notices, only instead stop Clifford. The sounder clicked in response almost immediately. Someone at the Austin Junction was relaying her message directly to field agents. Help was coming. But would it arrive in time? A shout from outside drew their attention. Clifford had apparently abandoned pretense, issuing orders for his men to prepare for assault despite the growing audience of confused celebration guests. "He's desperate," Graham observed grimly, "willing to risk exposure to eliminate us before we can share what we know." "Or he believes he can control the narrative afterward," Chelsea suggested. "Claim we fired first, forced his hand." A new commotion interrupted their speculation. The sound of horses approaching rapidly from the south, raising dust visible even in the moonlight. Graham shifted position to see this new development, his expression transforming from tension to cautious hope. "Riders," he reported, "at least a dozen, moving fast. They're flying a federal banner." Chelsea joined him at the window, heart pounding with renewed hope. "The Pinkertons and federal marshals," Graham confirmed as the group drew closer. "Your telegraph messages worked." Outside, Clifford's carefully constructed world was collapsing around him. The arriving federal agents quickly took control of the scene, ordering Clifford's men to lower their weapons. Most complied immediately, recognizing the authority of federal badges and the overwhelming force now assembled. Turner and several of his security team attempted resistance, raising rifles against the newcomers. The response was swift and decisive. Federal agents disarmed them with practiced efficiency, forcing them face down on the ground. Through it all, Clifford remained mounted on his horse, his expression a mask of cold fury as he watched his conspiracy unravel. When a federal marshal approached him directly, hand extended for his weapon, something broke in Clifford's carefully maintained control. With a cry of rage, he wheeled his horse and spurred it toward the Lee homestead, drawing his pistol as he charged. "Lee!" he shouted, madness evident in his voice. "This ends now!" Graham stepped away from the window, raising his rifle. "Stay back," he ordered Chelsea and Jenkins, moving toward the front door. "Graham, no!" Chelsea cried, recognizing his intent to meet Clifford's challenge directly. But Graham was already unbarring the door, his jaw set with determination. "This began between our families," he said quietly. "It should end between us." Before Chelsea could protest further, Graham stepped onto the porch of his childhood home, rifle held ready but not raised to fire. Clifford galloped toward him, pistol aimed, closing the distance rapidly. "Wyman!" a federal marshal shouted. "Stand down immediately!" Clifford ignored the order, his focus entirely on Graham. When he was 30 yards from the house, he fired, the shot going wide as his horse stumbled slightly on the uneven ground. Graham stood his ground, making no move to return fire despite the clear threat. His stillness seemed to infuriate Clifford further, driving him to reckless speed as he approached. 20 yards. 15. Clifford fired again, the bullet splintering wood on the porch railing inches from Graham's position. Federal agents were racing to intercept, but they wouldn't reach Clifford before he closed the final distance to the porch. Chelsea moved to Graham's side, the Winchester rifle from Clifford's study steady in her hands. "Together," she said simply. Clifford saw her appear and shifted his aim, hatred blazing in his eyes as he recognized his wife standing beside his enemy. His finger tightened on the trigger. The shot that rang out came not from Clifford's pistol, but from behind him. Jenkins, positioned at the side of the house, had made his choice. Clifford jerked in the saddle, his weapon discharging harmlessly into the air as he toppled sideways to the ground. Silence fell over the tableau. Graham and Chelsea on the porch, Clifford motionless on the ground, Jenkins lowering his rifle with grim satisfaction. Federal agents surrounded them, weapons ready but held in check as they assessed the situation. "He's alive," one agent reported, kneeling beside Clifford's prone form. "Shot in the shoulder." "I aim to wound," Jenkins stated flatly. "He deserves to stand trial for what he's done, not escape judgment through death." The federal marshal with the silver beard approached, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts as he surveyed the scene. "I'm Marshal Robert Caldwell," he announced. "Would someone care to explain what exactly has happened here?" Graham stepped forward. "My name is Graham Lee. This was my family's home before Clifford Wyman seized it through fraud and murder. I've been gathering evidence for the Pinkerton Detective Agency documenting Wyman's conspiracy to attack federal installations and assassinate government officials across Texas." "A serious accusation," Caldwell noted, though his tone suggested he found it credible. "You have proof?" "Telegrams have been sent to your office in Austin containing preliminary evidence," Chelsea said, joining the conversation. "The complete documentation was in a red ledger in my husband's possession." "Which he's likely destroyed by now," Graham added grimly. "Not necessarily," Jenkins interjected. "Wyman keeps a duplicate set of all important records in his private safe at the ranch, standard practice in case of fire or theft." Chelsea turned to him in surprise. "You know the combination?" A slight smile crossed Jenkins's weathered face. "Been his foreman for 7 years, ma'am. Man gets careless when he thinks you're just following orders without paying attention." Caldwell assessed the three of them thoughtfully. "If these allegations prove true, you've prevented what could have been a bloodbath across Texas." His gaze settled on Chelsea. "Though your position, Mrs. Wyman, remains complicated." "My marriage was based on false representations," Chelsea replied steadily. "When I discovered my husband's true nature and his criminal conspiracy, I made my choice to stand against him." Caldwell nodded slowly. A judge will need to determine the legal implications. For now, he turned to his deputies, secure the prisoner for transport to Austin, send riders to assist the other federal agents approaching from the south, and someone find a doctor for that shoulder wound. As Clifford was lifted onto a wagon, consciousness returning enough for him to glare hatefully at Graham and Chelsea, Marshal Caldwell addressed the gathered celebration guests who had witnessed the confrontation. Ladies and gentlemen, I regret to inform you that there will be no Independence Day celebration at Wymain Ranch. Evidence suggests your host was involved in criminal activities threatening the security of Texas and the United States government. His voice carried clearly in the night air. I must ask all of you to return to your homes or lodgings in town until formal statements can be taken regarding what you've observed here tonight. The crowd dispersed slowly, murmuring among themselves as the magnitude of the night's events sank in. Several who had been named in Graham's evidence to the Pinkertons were quietly taken into custody, including Colonel Barnett and Judge Hamilton. As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky with pale golden rose, Chelsea stood on the porch of the Lee homestead beside Graham, watching as federal agents secured the scene and prepared to depart for Austin with their prisoners. "It's over?" she said softly, hardly daring to believe it. Graham shook his head slightly. "Not over, just beginning." He gazed out over the neglected fields that had once been his family's pride. The land that represented both painful loss and potential future. My father's name will be cleared. This land will be restored. Chelsea followed his gaze, seeing not what was, but what could be. Fields renewed, fences mended, the house brought back to life with purpose and laughter. "It will take time," she observed. "Yes." Graham turned to her, his expression softening as he studied her face in the growing light. "The question is, will you have the patience to watch it happen?" The real question beneath his words was clear. Chelsea met his gaze steadily, her decision made long before this moment. "Not watch," she corrected gently. "Help make it happen, if that's what you want." Graham's hand found hers, fingers intertwining with a sense of rightness that transcended their extraordinary circumstances. "It's what I want," he confirmed, his voice rough with emotion. "Though the path won't be simple. Your marriage will be annulled once Clifford's crimes are proven in court," Chelsea finished. Pastoral Caldwell confirmed as much. "Even so, there will be talk. Speculation." Graham's concern was evident. "Your reputation means far less to me than the truth," Chelsea interrupted firmly. "And the truth is that I've found something with you I never expected to find in this life. Partnership based on mutual respect and genuine feeling." She squeezed his hand. "I won't surrender that for the sake of appearances or societal expectations." The first true smile Chelsea had ever seen transformed Graham's face, erasing years of hardship and vigilance in an instant. "Then we begin together," he said simply, "rebuilding what was lost, creating something new." As the sun crested the horizon, spilling golden light across the Texas landscape, Chelsea and Graham stood together on the porch of what would soon be their home, hands joined, faces turned toward a future neither had dared imagine possible until this moment. Behind them, the Lee homestead waited patiently to be restored. Before them stretched fields ready for renewal, much like their own lives, damaged by circumstance but resilient, prepared to flourish once again when given the chance. And between them, in the gentle pressure of fingers entwined, in the shared glances that required no words, in the hard-won understanding of who they were together and apart, lay the most precious restoration of all. Hearts that had found their way home through darkness to the light of a new day. The morning sun climbed higher, bathing the Lee homestead in golden light as the standoff continued. Federal Marshal Caldwell had established a perimeter between Clifford's remaining loyalists and the house, creating an uneasy stalemate. The celebration guests, who hadn't fled at the first sign of conflict, now clustered in small groups, watching the drama unfold with morbid fascination. Chelsea stood at the window of James Lee's study, the reconnected telegraph occasionally clicking with updates from Austin and other towns where Clifford's co-conspirators were being apprehended. The messages confirmed what she had dared to hope. Thanks to their warnings, the coordinated attacks had been thwarted before they could begin. The telegram from Redemption reports all is secure, she told Graham, relief evident in her voice. My mother and sister are safe. Graham nodded, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. That's one victory, at least. He peered through another window at the gathering outside. But this situation remains volatile. Clifford still has armed men willing to follow his orders, and several of his fellow conspirators are among the guests. Jenkins joined them, rifle held, ready but pointed downward. Marshal Caldwell is requesting proof of our allegations, says he can't take action against prominent citizens without substantial evidence. The Red Ledger would be conclusive, Chelsea said, but Clifford would never have brought it here. Graham's expression hardened with decision. Then we use what we have. The Telegraph transcripts, my Pinkerton documentation, and most importantly, public confrontation. Chelsea understood immediately. Force Clifford to reveal himself before witnesses he can't silence or control. Exactly. Graham turned to face her fully. But it means putting ourselves at risk, standing before them openly, where Clifford and his allies can see us clearly. Then we do it together, Chelsea said with quiet certainty. Jenkins checked his rifle one final time. I'll cover you from here. First sign of trouble, get back inside. The federal marshal waited on the front path as Chelsea and Graham emerged from the house. Caldwell was a tall man with the weathered face of someone who had spent decades enforcing the law on the frontier. His silver beard couldn't hide the skeptical set of his mouth, but his eyes held the caution of a man who had learned to reserve judgment until all facts were known. Mrs. Wymain, he acknowledged with a slight nod. Mr. Lee. I understand you have serious allegations against some of Texas' most respected citizens. We do, Marshal, Graham replied steadily. And we have evidence to support them. Chelsea stepped forward, a leather portfolio clutched in her hands. The collection of documents Graham had assembled during his months at Wymain Ranch, supplemented by her own notes copied from Clifford's ledger. This contains documented proof of a conspiracy to attack federal installations across Texas, assassinate government officials, and ignite a second rebellion against the United States, she stated clearly, her voice carrying to the assembled crowd. Planned and orchestrated by my husband, Clifford Wymain, and his associates. A murmur ran through the onlookers. Clifford, standing with Turner and Colonel Barnett at the edge of the federal perimeter, took an aggressive step forward before being blocked by one of Caldwell's deputies. Preposterous accusations from a faithless wife and the son of a murderer, he shouted, his face flushed with rage. Marshal, I demand you arrest these individuals for trespassing on my property and spreading seditious falsehoods. This property rightfully belongs to Graham Lee, Chelsea countered, her chin lifting with defiance. Acquired through your false testimony that sent his innocent father to prison for a murder you yourself committed. The accusation hung in the air, shocking even those who had begun to doubt Clifford's version of events. Marshal Caldwell's expression remained impassive as he accepted the portfolio from Chelsea, methodically examining its contents while the confrontation continued. My father was convicted in a court of law, Clifford stated coldly. The Lee property was purchased legally after foreclosure. After you arranged the murder of your business partner and framed my father for it, Graham responded, his voice level despite the emotion behind his words. All to secure the railway access point on our land for your Confederate sympathizers' network. Colonel Barnett moved to Clifford's side, his military bearing evident despite his civilian clothes. These are wild fabrications, Marshal. Wymain is a respected businessman, and I myself am a decorated veteran. The very suggestion that we would plot against the government we served is absurd. Is it? Chelsea challenged, addressing the crowd directly now. Then explain why telegraph operators across Texas were marked for assassination in my husband's private ledger. Explain the stockpiled weapons discovered at distribution points owned by men in this very gathering. Explain the coded messages arranging simultaneous attacks on federal marshals' offices, scheduled for last night. Her direct assault struck home. Several of the celebration guests began edging away from those Chelsea had implicated, creating visible division in what had been a unified social group. Marshal Caldwell looked up from the documents, his expression grave. These papers contained specific details that would be difficult to fabricate, he observed. including meeting minutes with signatures I recognize, supply manifests for weapons, and maps marking federal outposts. Forgeries, Clifford insisted, though his confidence had visibly faltered. Created by Lee to discredit me as revenge for his father's legitimate conviction. The Pinkerton Detective Agency has been gathering evidence of this conspiracy for months, Graham stated. Their agents are currently en route with additional documentation. What we present is merely a portion of the evidence against you and your co-conspirators. Caldwell nodded slowly, coming to a decision. I've seen enough to justify detaining these men for questioning, he announced, gesturing to his deputies. Mr. Wymany, Colonel Barnett, and the others named in these documents will be taken to Austin pending formal charges. Colonel Barnett's face contorted with fury. This is Northern tyranny, precisely the oppression we've endured since Appomattox. He turned to Clifford's armed men. Will you stand by while these carpetbagger appointees trample Texas sovereignty? The time has come to act. His impassioned appeal reached several of Turner's security team, who raised their weapons despite the federal deputies' warnings. The celebration guests scattered, seeking cover as the confrontation teetered on the edge of violence. Stand down, Caldwell ordered, his hand moving to his sidearm. Don't make this worse than it already is. In that moment of chaos, Clifford made his move. With speed that belied his cultured appearance, he drew a small derringer from his coat, a gentleman's concealed weapon, and lunged forward, breaking through the distracted federal line. If I fall, I'll take you with me, he snarled, aiming directly at Chelsea. Graham's reaction was instantaneous. He threw himself in front of her as Clifford fired, the bullet striking him in the left shoulder with enough force to spin him halfway around. He stumbled but remained standing, one hand pressed to the spreading blood stain on his shirt. Chelsea caught him as he swayed, her face white with shock and fear. Graham! Clifford raised the derringer again, his expression twisted with hatred. Before he could fire a second time, a shot rang out from the direction of the house. Clifford cried out in pain as his leg buckled beneath him, the weapon falling from his grasp. Jenkins stood on the porch, rifle still raised and smoking. That's enough, Wymane, he called, his weathered face grim with determination. It ends here. Federal deputies swarmed forward, subduing both Clifford and the agitated Colonel Barnett. Turner's men, seeing their employer wounded and captured, lowered their weapons in surrender. Get a doctor, Chelsea cried, helping Graham to sit on the porch steps. He's losing blood. One of the celebration guests stepped forward, a middle-aged man with spectacles and a black bag. I'm a physician, he announced, kneeling beside Graham to examine the wound. Bullet went through clean, missed the major blood vessels. He'll need stitching and rest, but should recover fully. Marshal Caldwell approached, holstering his weapon as order was restored. The doctor can treat both wounded men, he stated, gesturing toward Clifford, who lay restrained and groaning nearby. Jenkins, your shooting was well-timed. Could have killed him, Jenkins replied matter-of-factly. Chose not to. Man like that should face proper justice, not martyrdom. Caldwell nodded, respecting the sentiment. You'll need to give statements. All of you. Once the prisoners are transported to Austin, we can sort through this conspiracy properly. He looked toward Graham, who sat pale but alert as the doctor examined his wound. The Lee property will be held in trust pending investigation, but given the evidence already presented, I expect your claim will be recognized. And my father's name cleared? Graham asked, wincing as the doctor probed the wound. Based on what I've seen here and in these documents, I'd say that's likely, Caldwell confirmed. The prosecutor will review the original case in light of this new evidence. Chelsea maintained her position at Graham's side, her hand gripping his uninjured one as the doctor worked. Across the yard, she watched as Clifford was lifted onto a wagon for transport, his eyes finding hers with a hatred that required no words to express. For 5 years, Clifford Wymane had carefully constructed a facade of gentlemanly refinement and business acumen, concealing the ruthless conspirator beneath. That facade had now crumbled completely, revealing the true man to all who had gathered at the Lee homestead. His plot to reignite the conflict that had nearly destroyed the nation lay exposed and thwarted, his Confederates arrested or fleeing, his ambitions reduced to ashes. As the doctor finished bandaging Graham's shoulder, Chelsea heard the thunder of approaching horses. A dozen riders appeared on the eastern ridge, the lead man carrying a Pinkerton agency badge visible even at this distance. "Reinforcements," Graham observed with a tired smile. "Better late than never." Chelsea squeezed his hand gently. "It's truly over now." But even as she spoke, she knew that some things were just beginning. The Texas spring painted the countryside in vibrant color, blue bonnets carpeting the rolling hills, Indian paintbrush adding splashes of fiery orange, evening primrose unfurling delicate yellow blossoms in the late afternoon sunlight. After months of legal proceedings, depositions, and gradual healing, the land itself seemed to celebrate renewal. Chelsea guided her horse along the newly repaired fence line of the Lee property, her heart lightening at the sight of the homestead in the distance. No longer abandoned and neglected, the limestone house had been restored to its former dignity. Fresh paint brightened the trim, new glass sparkled in windows that had been broken or clouded, and smoke curled invitingly from the kitchen chimney. In the 2 months since the confrontation at dawn, the transformation had been remarkable. Not just of the property, but of lives that had been entangled in Clifford's web of conspiracy and deceit. The federal investigation had expanded far beyond Texas, uncovering similar cells of Confederate resistance in Louisiana, Georgia, and the Carolinas. Clifford and his closest associates remained in federal custody, awaiting trial for treason and conspiracy, their defiance gradually giving way to recrimination as each sought to shift blame to the others. Chelsea had been granted an annulment on grounds of fraud and criminal concealment, the court recognizing that Clifford had deliberately misrepresented himself and his intentions during their courtship. Her testimony had been crucial in connecting the various threads of the conspiracy, earning her a formal commendation from the governor and more importantly to Chelsea, the restoration of her family's good name. Her mother and sister had joined her briefly in Austin during the legal proceedings. Emma wide-eyed at the drama surrounding her normally practical older sister. They had returned to Redemption afterward, though with frequent correspondence as Chelsea established her new life. As she approached the house, Chelsea spotted Graham in the vegetable garden, kneeling to inspect the newly planted rows despite the doctor's continued admonishments to rest his healing shoulder. He looked up at the sound of hoofbeats, his face brightening at the sight of her. "You're early," he called, rising to meet her as she dismounted. "I thought you wouldn't arrive until tomorrow." "The deposition concluded sooner than expected," Chelsea replied, allowing herself to be drawn into his embrace. "Judge Hamilton's confession implicated so many others that my testimony was merely confirmation." Graham's arms tightened around her. Even after weeks of regular visits between Austin and the Lee Ranch, each reunion felt precious. A gift neither took for granted, after all they had risked. "You're here now," he said simply. "That's what matters." They walked together toward the house, Chelsea recounting the latest developments in Austin while Graham updated her on the restoration progress. Jenkins had stayed on as foreman, helping to rebuild what Clifford had neglected during his ownership. Several former Wymain Ranch hands had joined them, preferring honest work for a fair employer over uncertain prospects elsewhere. Inside, the house welcomed them with the comforting sense of home. Beeswax polish on the restored furniture, fresh bread cooling in the kitchen, wildflowers arranged in simple vases. Graham had preserved what remained of his family's possessions while allowing Chelsea to add touches that reflected their shared tastes. "Mrs. Rivera prepared dinner before leaving," Graham said, referring to the housekeeper who came in daily from the nearby town. "She insisted you'd be hungry after your journey." "She wasn't wrong," Chelsea admitted with a smile. They settled in the study after dinner, the room that had witnessed the most dramatic moments of their confrontation with Clifford, now transformed into a peaceful sanctuary. New books filled the shelves, joining the few volumes that had survived the years of abandonment. A chess set sat on a small table by the window, a game in progress that they continued whenever Chelsea visited. Graham seemed unusually pensive as evening settled around them, his attention focused on the flames dancing in the fireplace rather than their conversation. "Is your shoulder troubling you?" Chelsea asked, concerned by his distraction. "No, it's healing well." He met her gaze, a curious mixture of determination and vulnerability in his expression. "I've been thinking about the future, now that my father's name has been cleared and the property restored." "You've accomplished what you set out to do 5 years ago," Chelsea acknowledged. Yes, but that was only half the journey. Graham rose, moving to the bookshelf where he selected a volume bound in fine leather. I found this among my father's books that survived, a first edition of Tennyson's poems. Appropriate, I thought. He placed the book in her hands. Chelsea opened it carefully, the familiar verses bringing memories of their early conversations in the stables at Y Main Ranch, when literature had created the first bridge between them. Something slipped from between the pages, a small piece of paper folded neatly in quarters. Chelsea unfolded it to find a deed transfer form with her name entered as joint owner of the Lee property. "Graham?" she questioned, looking up in surprise. He knelt beside her chair, taking her free hand in both of his. "Chelsea Boatwright, from the moment you defended my reading Whitman as something other than pretension, I began to hope for possibilities I had long since abandoned." His voice deepened with emotion. "That hope has grown into certainty that I want to build the rest of my life with you beside me, equal partners in whatever the future holds." Chelsea's heart seemed to expand in her chest, joy rising like spring water from a hidden well. "Are you proposing, Graham Lee?" "Illegally, perhaps," he admitted with a smile that transformed his serious face. "But with absolute conviction. Will you marry me, Chelsea? Make this restored house truly a home?" "Yes," she whispered, the single word containing volumes of meaning as she leaned forward to seal her answer with a kiss. Later, as twilight gave way to a star-filled Texas night, they walked together through the garden, making plans for their shared future. The newly repaired fence line gleamed white in the moonlight, marking boundaries that now represented possibility rather than division. "There's one more thing I'd like to show you," Graham said, leading her toward a small building near the eastern corner of the property, his father's old engineering office, now carefully restored. Inside, Chelsea was surprised to find telegraph equipment set up on a solid oak desk, a more elaborate version of what they had used during the standoff 2 months earlier. "I've reconnected the line to the main telegraph network," Graham explained, with an official designation as the Lee Boatwright Station. "The railway company has contracted us to handle their communications for this section." Chelsea ran her fingers over the brass key, feeling the familiar shape that had once been the center of her daily life in Redemption. "You did this for me?" "For us," Graham corrected gently. "Your skills as a telegraph operator helped save lives that night. It seemed fitting that those same skills should be part of our new beginning." Emotion tightened Chelsea's throat as she recognized the gift he was offering. Not just a means of income, but respect for the abilities she had developed through years of dedication. The telegraph key that had once transmitted Clifford's coded conspiracy messages would now carry everyday communications, connecting families and communities across the recovering nation. "Would you like to send the first official message?" Graham asked, pulling up a chair for her at the operator's desk. Chelsea sat, her fingers finding their position on the key with muscle memory that had never faded. "To whom? Your mother and sister? To announce our engagement?" She nodded, composing the message in her mind before translating it into the familiar pattern of dots and dashes. The key clicked rhythmically beneath her touch, the sounder echoing each signal as it traveled along copper wires toward Redemption. "Redemption Station, stop from? Lee Boatwright Station, stop. Chelsea Boatwright and Graham Lee announce engagement. Stop. Wedding planned midsummer. Stop. Love transforms all. Stop." The reply came swiftly. Emma at the telegraph key in Redemption, her excitement evident even through the mechanical clicks. "Congratulations, dearest sister. Stop, mother weeping with joy. Stop, will travel for wedding. Stop, love transcends all distances." "Stop." Chelsea translated the message aloud for Graham, who stood behind her chair, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. The simple exchange represented everything they had fought for. Family connections maintained across distance, honest communications replacing deception, love overcoming the divisions that had nearly torn Texas apart once more. Outside the window, fireflies blinked in the gathering darkness, nature's own telegraph signals illuminating the spring night. The Lee homestead stood solid against the Texas sky, its restoration a testament to perseverance and healing. Within its walls and across its renewed fields, two people who had found each other against impossible odds, prepared to build a life founded on truth and genuine feeling, the most profound restoration of all. Graham leaned down to press a kiss to Chelsea's temple, his voice soft with promise. "Welcome home." She reached up to touch his face, gratitude and love overflowing in a heart once guarded by necessity. "I am home," she whispered, "wherever we are together." Around them, the telegraph office hummed with potential energy, ready to connect them to the wider world beyond their boundaries. But in that moment, the only connection that mattered was the one between them. Forged in danger, tested by sacrifice, and now strengthened by the certainty that what they had found in each other was rare and precious beyond measure. The whispers that had once carried conspiracy along copper wires had been transformed into messages of hope and new beginnings, a transformation that mirrored their own journey from strangers bound by circumstance to partners united by choice and abiding love. Epilogue. Whispers on the wire. The soft June breeze carried the scent of roses through the open window of the telegraph office where Chelsea sat, fingers moving with practiced precision over the brass key. Outside, meadow larks called from fence posts bordering pastures where Graham's horses grazed. Sleek, powerful animals that had already earned the Lee Boat Ranch a reputation for exceptional breeding stock. 1 year had transformed the once neglected property into a testament to renewal. The limestone house gleamed in the afternoon sunlight, its weathered dignity enhanced rather than diminished by careful restoration. Gardens flourished where weeds had once claimed dominion. New outbuildings housed the growing horse operation, while the small telegraph station had expanded to serve as a vital communication link for the railway that now ran along the property's southern boundary. The key clicked rhythmically beneath Chelsea's touch as she transmitted the day's most important message. Redemption stop from Leeboat Wright Station. Stop James Robert Lee born June 15th. Stop mother and son healthy. Stop father inseparably proud. Stop with love Chelsea. Stop. She smiled as she completed the transmission, knowing her mother and sister would be waiting eagerly for this news. Little James, named for Graham's father, had arrived 3 days earlier. A robust boy with his father's dark eyes and what Graham insisted was his mother's determined chin. The sounder beside her began to click in response. Emma's distinctive rhythm immediately recognizable, even after a year away from the Redemption Telegraph office. "Congratulations, beloved sister. Stop mother weeping with joy. Stop will arrive next week to meet nephew. Stop prepare for excessive coddling. Stop, Emma. Stop." Chelsea laughed aloud at her sister's warning, imagining the flurry of activity that would accompany her mother's arrival. Amelia Boatwright had embraced her role as grandmother with characteristic thoroughness, already sending packages of hand-sewn baby clothes and lengthy letters filled with advice on infant care. The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention to the window. Graham approached on Valor, the stallion he had rescued from mistreatment at Wymain Ranch. The nervous chestnut mare Chelsea had first seen him gentling, now transformed into a magnificent animal that moved with proud confidence beneath his rider. Chelsea's heart quickened at the sight of her husband, still affected by his presence even after a year of marriage. The trials they had endured together had forged a bond between them that daily life had only strengthened, a partnership built on mutual respect and deepening love. She finished her work quickly, recording the day's messages in the logbook and ensuring all transmissions had been properly acknowledged. By the time Graham entered the office, she had already covered the telegraph key and organized the desk for the next day's operations. "Quiet on the wires?" he asked, leaning down to kiss her cheek. "Mostly routine communications," Chelsea replied, rising to properly return his embrace. "Though I did send the announcement to Redemption. Emma says they'll visit next week." Graham's smile warmed his serious face. "Your mother will likely rearrange our entire household within hours of arrival." "Almost certainly," Chelsea agreed with a laugh. "How are the yearlings settling in?" "Better than expected. Jenkins says the bay filly shows exceptional promise." Graham's expression softened. "How are our own new arrival and his mother today?" "Both thriving," Chelsea assured him, linking her arm through his as they left the telegraph office. "Mrs. Rivera's with James now, practically shooing me out the door to work, insisting I needed the normalcy of my routine." They walked together along the stone path that connected the telegraph station to the main house, passing gardens bright with early summer blooms. A short distance away, the railroad tracks gleamed in the afternoon sun, the same tracks that had been among Clifford's primary targets in his thwarted conspiracy. So much had changed in the year since those desperate days. Clifford and his primary co-conspirators had been convicted of treason, their sentences commuted from death to life imprisonment in recognition of the still fragile peace between North and South. The Lee family name had been formally cleared, James Lee's false conviction posthumously overturned with a public apology from the governor. The land that had been stolen through fraud and murder had flourished under its rightful stewardship. Graham's knowledge of horses, combined with Chelsea's organizational skills and telegraph expertise, had transformed the property into a vital link in the region's recovery. The railway company had established a small station at the southern boundary, making Lee Boatwright Ranch an important waypoint for both goods and communications. Inside the house, Mrs. Rivera, the housekeeper who had started as a daily helper and gradually become an indispensable part of their household, met them in the entrance hall. "El niño is sleeping," she reported with the proprietary pride of one who considered the baby partly her responsibility. "Such a good boy, hardly a fuss all afternoon." "Thank you, Mrs. Rivera," Chelsea said warmly. "Please, go home to your family. We can manage for the evening." The older woman hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave her charges. "The dinner is prepared, just needs warming, and I've laid out fresh linens for the nursery." "We'll be fine," Graham assured her with the gentle firmness that had first caught Chelsea's attention in the stables at Wymain Ranch. "Enjoy your evening with your grandchildren." After seeing Mrs. Rivera off with a basket of fresh vegetables from their garden, Chelsea and Graham climbed the stairs to the nursery. The room that had once been Graham's childhood bedroom now held a carefully crafted cradle, Jenkins's gift to the family he had helped save during those dangerous days. Chelsea felt Graham's arm slip around her waist as they stood watching their son's gentle breathing, the miracle of his existence still new enough to inspire wonder. "He has your coloring," she whispered, leaning into her husband's embrace. "And your spirit," Graham replied softly. "I saw it in his eyes this morning. That same determination that faced down Clifford Wymain and his conspirators." Chelsea smiled at the comparison. "Let's hope he finds less dramatic ways to express it." They left the baby sleeping and made their way downstairs to the kitchen, working together with the easy synchronicity they had developed over the past year. As Chelsea warmed the stew Mrs. Rivera had prepared, Graham set the table and sliced fresh bread from the morning's baking. Their conversation flowed naturally from topic to topic: the progress of the yearlings, an upcoming visit from Marshall Caldwell, now a regular guest, Jenkins's courtship of the widowed shopkeeper in town, domestic details interspersed with memories and plans, the rhythm of a shared life that had seemed impossible during those dark days at Wymain Ranch. After dinner, they settled on the wide front porch to watch the sunset paint the Texas sky in spectacular oranges and purples. Graham had built the porch swing himself during the winter months, determined to create a place where they could sit together at day's end, reviewing accomplishments and sharing dreams. "I received a letter from the Pinkerton office in Chicago," Graham mentioned as they swayed gently in the gathering twilight. "They've offered me a position as a regional investigator." Chelsea raised her eyebrows in surprise. "Are you considering it?" "No," he said without hesitation. "My work with them is finished. This," he gestured toward the property stretching before them, "is where I belong now. Where we belong." Chelsea squeezed his hand in understanding. The quest that had driven Graham for 5 years to clear his father's name and bring Clifford to justice had been fulfilled. The future now held different priorities, different dreams. From the nursery window above them came the first soft sounds of James awakening. "I'll go," Graham said, pressing a kiss to her temple before rising. Left alone on the porch, Chelsea looked out over the land that had become home in every sense of the word. The evening breeze stirred the wildflowers dotting the pasture, while in the distance the telegraph wires hummed faintly. A sound so familiar she often forgot to hear it. Those same wires that had once carried Clifford's coded messages of division and violence now transmitted ordinary hopes and concerns. business transactions, and family news. The nation's healing was reflected in those humble copper strands stretching across the landscape, connecting communities that had once stood divided by war and its bitter aftermath. Her own journey from the telegraph office in Redemption to this porch had been anything but straightforward. The desperate marriage to Clifford, entered into for security rather than love, the discovery of his conspiracy and her alliance with Graham, the dangerous game they had played, risking everything to prevent renewed bloodshed. Yet, from those perilous beginnings had come this unexpected happiness, a true partnership with a man whose quiet strength matched her own determination, whose respect for her abilities had never wavered, a home rebuilt from ruins, a family created through choice rather than obligation, work that utilized both their talents for a common purpose. Graham returned with James cradled against his shoulder, the baby's dark eyes wide and curious as they took in the colorful sunset sky. He didn't want to miss this, Graham explained, settling beside Chelsea on the swing. She reached to stroke her son's soft cheek, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain such feeling. "He'll see many more," she said. "We all will, together." As darkness gradually claimed the land, stars appearing one by one in the deepening blue, Chelsea thought of all the messages she had sent and received over the years. Some had changed lives, her own included. Others had been mundane but necessary, the everyday communications that formed the backbone of community. Each one represented connection. Between people, between places, between past and future. Like the telegraph wire itself, stretching across vast distances to bring distant voices close. Their lives had spanned seemingly insurmountable divides to find this shared place of belonging. Graham's arm tightened around her shoulders, his face peaceful in the fading light. "Listen," he said softly. In the silence that followed, Chelsea heard it, the faint, continuous hum of the telegraph wires, carrying countless messages between countless lives. Stories of loss and discovery, reunion and separation, endings and beginnings, all traveling along the same copper strands. And among them, their own story. Not finished, but continuing to unfold with each sunrise and sunset, each challenge faced together, each moment of quiet joy like this one. A story transmitted not through dots and dashes, but through the language of shared days and mutual understanding. James made a small content sound, settling more comfortably against his father's chest as the last traces of daylight faded from the western sky. Tomorrow would bring new messages to send and receive, new tasks to complete, new moments to treasure, but for now this quiet communion was message enough. Home and family, promise and fulfillment, all contained in the gentle rhythm of their breathing and the steadfast beating of their hearts. Somewhere in the darkness, a night bird called to its mate, its voice carrying clearly across the Texas night. Above them, the first evening star appeared, a bright pinpoint in the gathering darkness, and all around them, the land that had witnessed so much strife now rested in peace, healing like the nation itself. Slowly, imperfectly, but with persistent hope. Chelsea rested her head against Graham's shoulder, her son's tiny hand curled around her finger, and knew with bone-deep certainty that of all the messages she had ever transmitted, the simplest remained the most profound. Love endures, connects, transforms. Everything else was just details in a story still being written, whispered along the wires of time to those with hearts open to receive it.